Mr. President, council members, and participants, we are now live.
Thank you very much, and good morning to all. I'm going to get started. But before we begin the public hearing, I'll make the following announcement. Due to the continuing threat to public health from COVID-19 and its variants, City Council committees are currently meeting remotely. We are using Microsoft Teams to make these remote meeting hearings possible. Instruction for how the public may view and offer instruction for how the public can access this. The information is included in the public hearing notices that are published in the Daily News, Enquirer, and Legal Intelligencer prior to the hearings and can be also found on phlcouncil.com. I now note the hour has come. Mr. McDermott, would you please call the roll? And members that are in attendance, just please say a couple of words to make sure that your image is displayed on the screen.
Councilmember Bass.
Good morning, Mr. President and colleagues. I'm present.
All right. This is spokesperson.
Councilmember.
Good morning, Council President, colleagues. I'm present.
Good morning.
Councilmember Dom.
Good morning, Council President, colleagues, administration, and the listening public. Present.
Good morning.
Councilmember Gautier.
Good morning, Council President, colleagues, and to our partners in the administration. Present.
Good morning.
Councilmember Gilmore Richardson.
Colleagues, and good morning to the administration. I'm present.
Good morning.
Councilmember Green.
Good morning, Council President. Good morning, fellow colleagues, City Council. Good morning to the administration and to the viewing public.
Councilmember Gim.
Good morning, Council President. Good morning, colleagues. I am present.
Good morning.
Councilmember Johnson. Councilmember Jones.
Good morning, Mr. President, colleagues, the administration and viewing public. I am present.
Good morning.
Councilmember O'Neill.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Councilmember O.
Good morning, Council President. Good morning, colleagues. Good morning, administration.
Good morning.
Councilmember Parker.
Good morning, Mr. President, colleagues, administration, and viewing public.
Good morning.
Councilmember Quinones Sanchez.
Good morning, Council President, colleagues, administration. Let's do this.
All right. Good morning.
Councilmember Squilla.
Good morning.
Good morning.
And Councilmember Thomas.
Oh, you heard me. Okay, thank you.
And Councilmember Thomas.
Good morning, Council President. Good morning, everybody. I'm present.
Good morning.
And Council President Clark.
And good morning to all. We're going to get started. We've established our quorum. And this is the public hearing on the committee of the whole regarding bills number 220, 284, 220, 285, 220, 286, 220, 287, 220, 288, 220, 240, and resolution number 220300. Mr. McDermott, would you please read the titles of the bills and resolution?
Bill number 220284, an ordinance to adopt a capital program for the 6 fiscal years 2023 to 2028 inclusive. Bill number 220285, an ordinance to adopt a fiscal 2023 capital budget. Bill number 220286, an ordinance adopting the operating budget for fiscal year 2023. Bill number 220287, an ordinance amending section 101001 of the Philadelphia Code entitled Fees of Commissioners of Records to increase certain fees for the recording of deeds and mortgages and related documents under certain terms and conditions. Bill number 220288, an ordinance amending section 191403 of the Philadelphia Code entitled Imposition of Tax by creating a Philadelphia County Demolition Fund to increase and encourage economic development by demolishing blighted properties within the city, imposing a related fee for recorded documents and related items, and making technical changes all under certain terms and conditions. Bill number 220240, an ordinance substantially increasing the budget and number of areas and neighborhoods around the city served by the Community Life Improvement Program, CLIP, to improve the health, safety, and cleanliness of every neighborhood and enhance the quality of life for all residents. And resolution number 220300, resolution providing for the approval by the Council of the City of Philadelphia, a revised 5-year financial plan for the City of Philadelphia covering fiscal years 2023 through 2027 and incorporating revised changes with respects to fiscal year 2022, which is to be submitted by the mayor to the Pennsylvania Intergovernmental Cooperation Authority pursuant to the Intergovernmental Cooperation Agreement authorized by an ordinance of this council approved by the mayor on January 3rd, 1992, by and between the city and the authority.
Thank you, Mr. McDermott. Today, we begin the public hearing of the committee of the whole to consider the bills read by the clerk that constitute proposed operating and capital spending measures for fiscal 2023, a capital program, and a forward-looking capital program for fiscal years 2023 through 2028. Before we begin to hear the testimony from the witnesses we have today, everyone who has been invited to the meeting to testify should be aware that this public hearing is being recorded, and because the hearing is public, participants and viewers have no reasonable expectation of privacy. So by continuing to be in the meeting, you are consenting to being recorded. Additionally, prior to recognizing members for questions or comments they have for witnesses, I will note for the record at this time that we will use the chat feature available on Microsoft Teams to allow members to signify that they wish to be recognized. In order to comply with the Sunshine Act, the chat feature must only be used for this particular purpose. Today, we will hear testimony from Finance, the Mayor's Office, regarding the budget proposal, including the 5-year plan and capital program. Also joining us today, there are Treasurer, Revenue, Sinking Fund, and Board of Pensions. Would like to say that we find ourselves in a much different environment than we did the prior 2 years while we're in the midst of a very aggressive COVID-19 pandemic. But I must also remind our listeners that we still have challenges before us. COVID-19 has not gone away. So as we deal with this particular budget, we will have to take all that into the account and the uncertainty of all of the things that are going on, not just in the city of Philadelphia, but going on in the world as it relates to these inflationary type of environment. So we will, on behalf of the taxpayers, make sure that we do our due diligence as we make these decisions as it relates to the mayor's proposed budget. With that, Mr. McDermott, our first person to testify from the administration is
James Engler, Chief of Staff, Mayor's Office.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and good morning, Mr. Engler.
Good morning, Council President Clark and members of City Council. My name is James Engler, Chief of Staff to Mayor Kenny, and I'm here to testify in support of the Mayor's proposed 5-year plan, along with all the supporting budget and revenue bills that were introduced on March 31st, 2022. Joining me today are Finance Director Rob Dubow, Budget Director Marissa Waxman, and Cabinet members and department heads from across the administration. You have my full testimony, which I will summarize now. As the pandemic enters its 3rd year, the City of Philadelphia has begun to stabilize and build for a stronger future. This 5-year plan builds a foundation for that future and revives the mayor's commitment to leave a legacy of true and lasting equity undergirded by his key priorities: quality education for all, a safer and more just Philadelphia, health equity for all, inclusive economy and thriving neighborhoods, and diverse, efficient, and effective government. This 5-year plan was informed by over 20 sessions with more than 500 residents, community leaders, and city employees, and a public town hall with Mayor Kenny. This $5.6 billion general fund budget reflects the priorities and needs of Philadelphians. While we have not returned to the level of positive fund balances the city had worked to build pre-pandemic, but bolstered by the $1.4 billion in American Rescue Plan funds, the city can sustain current operations, provide a small cushion against future disruptions, and make targeted investments to improve educational equity and public safety, and to prepare for the influx of dollars and opportunity coming from the bipartisan infrastructure law. This budget builds on the historic commitments to public education that the city has made over the last 6 years by investing nearly $270 million in FY2023 and $1.4 billion over the life of the plan in the School District of Philadelphia, in addition to local tax revenues that support the district. In continued pursuit of accessible and affordable education, the FY23 budget increases support for the Octavius Cato Scholarship at the Community College of Philadelphia. Since its start in FY21, over 500 Cato Scholars have received tuition-free enrollment. The plan proposes investing a total of more than $250 million in CCP over the next 5 years to further the accessibility, affordability, and attractiveness of CCP as a post-secondary institution of choice. The FY23 budget provides for the continued expansion of PHL pre-K and community schools programs, supported by revenue from the Philadelphia beverage tax. PHL pre-K will expand by 300 slots, and we will add 3 new community schools this year, bringing the total to 20 schools. The Free Library of Philadelphia also supports learning opportunities for residents across the city. We propose investing an additional $9.7 million in FY23 to enable stable, consistent 5-day service, including Saturdays at regional libraries. Together, these investments prioritize the quality education of children, youth, and adults to support a more rapid and equitable recovery and to break the intergenerational cycle of poverty. Like cities across the country, Philadelphia continues to wrestle with the surge of violence that began in 2020 and continued in 2021. The trauma of this violence affects all Philadelphians. The administration continues to treat gun violence as a public health crisis, pulling together every agency and institution that engages with our residents to address it. The goal is to continue to offer better opportunities and services for individuals and communities at high risk, to provide swift and predictable law enforcement consequences for those engaged in violence who do not want help, and to always work with authentic community engagement to increase long-term resilience. The full set of violence prevention investments total $155 million in the FY22 budget. For FY23, those same categories of investment grow 18.5% to $184.5 million. Details on these investments are found in the 5-year plan and in my full testimony. Additionally, the plan makes investments in crisis incident response teams. These teams serve as another tool for 911 callers with behavioral health needs, ensuring that a range of services available to provide an appropriate response. The city is committed to ensuring that COVID-19 prevention and treatment options are available to all residents, regardless of insurance status or ability to pay. The FY23 budget contains robust continued support for city-funded health centers to provide access to quality care for those who are uninsured, as well as to support outside organizations meeting community health needs in Philadelphia. FY23 will see the continuation of the critical work of the Opioid Response Unit to spearhead our multi-departmental effort and strengthen the city's ability to address the ongoing opioid crisis across the city. We will invest $17 million over the 5-year plan to maintain the suite of low-barrier emergency and permanent housing services for people who have been chronically homeless and have substance use disorders, plus an additional $5.1 million in FY23 to support services and safety in Kensington. We recognize that safe and stable housing is a critical foundation for health. In addition to the opioid-related homeless service investment mentioned before, we will invest $6.4 million over the 5-year plan to sustain non-congregate shelter services for seniors and $5.7 million to increase support for homeless service providers, including to increase wages for providers of these critical services. This plan makes the charter-required investment of nearly $28 million in FY23 and $144 million over 5 years in the Housing Trust Fund. The plan also includes funds to continue to support eviction prevention and the new Right to Counsel program that was launched in FY22. To further increase the supply of affordable housing, the plan contains continued support for the Neighborhood Preservation Initiative to support the production and preservation of affordable housing units, home repair and tangled title programs, eviction diversion services, and other innovative programs, including a new guaranteed income pilot called PHL Housing Plus. Following 2 years of unprecedented economic upheaval from the pandemic, the economy in Philadelphia is coming back strong. Local unemployment is now down to around 6%. Construction is booming and tourism is on the upswing. The implementation of the federal bipartisan infrastructure law will further propel a thriving economy that provides opportunities to all Philadelphia residents and neighborhoods. This once-in-a-generation infusion of federal funding should bring more than $1 billion for roads, bridges, transit, water infrastructure, and broadband access to the city, and thousands of new jobs. The FY23 budget includes a $20 million investment across 12 city agencies to prepare for the bipartisan infrastructure law. The plan also includes $13 million in FY23 in investment through PIDC for programs like the Taking Care of Business Commercial Corridor Cleaning Program, funded with $7 million in FY23, and other programs assisting small business owners of color to access capital and growth and to attract businesses and quality jobs to locate in Philadelphia. The FY23 budget includes expansion of multiple successful low-barrier employment programs. These investments total more than $2.3 million and will form a coordinated system of accessible employment opportunities with pathways to more permanent employment. During the COVID-19 pandemic, the city's parks and recreation centers became havens in new ways as residents and visitors, many of them children, relied on the centers, trails, parks, and playgrounds for gatherings to stay safe. The FY23 budget invests an additional $2.8 million in FY23 and $11 million over the life of the plan in Parks and Rec. These investments will allow PPR to expand hours and improve programming in the neighborhoods that need it most, and to make sure that PPR spaces are safe, clean, and ready to use to meet this increased demand. Building on the significant investments in clean, safe, and accessible streets in FY22, the FY23 budget includes funds for more street paving and further expansion of street sweeping. The street sweeping program will expand to 8 new neighborhoods for a total of 14. The Streets Department will also receive $2 million to stand up additional crews to respond to illegal dumping. In FY23, the Kenney administration will continue to expand efforts to reshape the internal processes of government in service of Philadelphians. These initiatives and reforms will ensure that Philadelphia is fiscally stable and builds towards increasing financial resilience, provides excellent equitable service delivery, engages communities, and advances a more diverse and inclusive workforce and workplace culture for our dedicated employees. FY23 will see the continued implementation of Executive Order 1-20, which embeds racial equity as an explicit governing principle. By the end of FY23, all administration departments will have developed racial equity action plans, setting forth priority strategies to achieve greater racially equitable impact and advance equitable outcomes for all, including communities of color, individuals with disabilities, individuals of immigrant status, women, and LGBTQ residents. To drive diversity in recruitment and ensure that our city workforce across all levels and functions reflects the diversity of the communities we serve, we have invested in additional recruitment capacity for the Office of Human Resources. To support these investments, the city will use $5.51 billion in revenues, leaving a $153 million fund balance at the close of FY23. The plan proposes no tax rate increases and will draw down $335 million in FY23 in American Rescue Plan funds, and the entire $1.4 billion by December 2024 to support this level of spending. We are anticipating new property assessments that reflect significant growth in property values. The administration will continue to work closely with City Council on potential tax relief and reforms as the data becomes available during the budget process. Through the investments I've outlined and others included in this plan, Philadelphia will work toward becoming a city where equal opportunities are open to all residents. Race is not a determinant of success, and diversity is elevated as one of Philadelphia's greatest assets. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today, and we look forward to working with all members of council throughout this budget process. All of us here representing the administration are available to answer the questions that you may have, including on the Mayor's Office and Department of Labor budgets, for which we have submitted written testimony today. Next, we will have testimony from Martine DeCamp, Deputy Executive Director of the Philadelphia City Planning Commission, on the proposed FY23 capital budget and the FY23 through 28 capital program.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Singler. Mr. Camp, do you want to proceed with summary of your testimony?
Yes, thank you. Good morning, Council President Clark and members of City Council. I'm Martine DeCamp, Deputy Executive Director of the City Planning Commission. Along with my city colleagues, we're here to present for your review and consideration the recommended fiscal year 2023 to 2028 capital program and fiscal 2023 capital budget. These were approved by City Planning Commission on March 24th, 2022. The recommended program is a 6-year plan for investing in the city's physical and technology infrastructure, neighborhood and community facilities, city-owned buildings, and specialized vehicles. The recommended budget reflects the spending appropriations for the first year of the 6-year program. As both the program and budget are key instruments of planned physical development, the Philadelphia Home Rule Charter directs that their initial preparation and submission to the mayor be a function of the City Planning Commission. Beginning in early fall of last year, the City Planning Commission and the Budget Office received and evaluated requests from 20 departments. We then worked with the department heads and managers to produce a capital program and budget that addresses our capital needs, aligns with city administration priorities, including racial equity, and reflect our financial resources and spending capacity. The recommended 6-year capital program calls for over $1 billion of new city tax-supported general obligation bond funding to support public improvements throughout Philadelphia. When possible, city funds are used to leverage additional resources provided by our greatly appreciated regional, state, federal, and private partners. Considering all sources of funding, including self-sustaining aviation and water funds and carry-forward appropriations from previous years, the recommended capital program proposes $10.99 billion of additional improvements. For fiscal year 2023 alone, the recommended capital budget calls for $181 million of new general obligation bond funding. The proposed $181 million is consistent with the city's estimated ability to support debt service. For fiscal year 2023, recommendations in the capital budget include, but are not limited to, investments in streets, parks, commercial corridors, and other facilities to support an inclusive economy and thriving neighborhoods, support for information technology infrastructure, public property renovations, and fleet vehicles and facilities to ensure a diverse, efficient, and effective government. Capital investments in health equity for all through renovations at city health centers and city-owned shelters. Investments in city-owned free library, zoo, and art museum facilities to complement schools' capital investment and provide quality education for all. Renovations to fire, police, and prison facilities to help achieve a safer and more just Philadelphia. We're pleased to propose these investments, but we know they do not include all the projects that departments requested. There remains a lot of documented need. But the amount of recommended new spending in this year's capital program and budget is limited. Increasing city borrowing means increasing debt service and fixed costs, reducing the city's budgetary flexibility and potentially impacting the city's bond rating. In fiscal year 2024 through fiscal year 2028, city GO funding is currently recommended to return to roughly $170 million per year. We do have the opportunity to spend down or reprogram carry forward dollars from prior year appropriations before the city appropriates new tax-supported funds. With many projects disrupted or delayed over the past year due to impacts from the pandemic, the amount of carry forward appropriations available to many departments remains significant. We also have an opportunity to strategically leverage city appropriations to capital as matches for far larger amounts of new federal funding available from the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. An estimated $60 million is appropriated for a local match. This once-in-a-generation infusion of federal funding should bring more than $1 billion over the next 5 years for roads, bridges, transit, water infrastructure, and broadband access to the city, and thousands of new jobs. The initial $60 million for matches is a start, but we anticipate needing to add additional funds in future years to fully realize the benefits of the opportunity. Overall, given our financial constraints and the challenges of the past year, the administration feels the recommended capital program and budget invests in the city's infrastructure to the greatest extent possible. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. We'd be happy to address any questions that you may have. Please note that leaders of city departments are present to assist in answering your questions. Thank you.
Thank you. There's going to be, I believe, significant overlap as it relates to the testimony and the implementation of the proposed 5-year plan and budget. So if it's okay with the members, I'll put Mr. DeBoe up also to give his testimony, and then we'll ask questions that I anticipate that will be across the board to all three witnesses today. Mr. DeBoe, can you give us your a summary of your testimony, sir?
Yep. And do you want me to do testimony for all the finance departments that are up today?
Yeah. And then, that way, I think it'll be more efficient because I know a lot of the questions will be kind of all over the place. So to get the testimony out of the way, and then ask questions about the various aspects of your proposed budget.
Then I'll be really quick. My name is Rob Dubo. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today on the budget of the Office of Director of Finance. You have a written summary of my testimony and written summaries of testimony from the Treasurer, Jackie Dunn, the Revenue Commissioner, Frank Breslin, and the Executive Director of the Pension Board, Francis Bielli. And we are happy to answer any questions you have about that testimony. Thank you.
All right. I anticipate that there will be many, so please be prepared. We're going to open it up to questions now. Again, members, please put your questions and your notification in the chat so we can make sure that we get your name and get the call on you. Chair recognized, well, let me get mine in first. I'll take the point of personal privilege, and I will try my best to stay at the 7-minute limit on my first round. I just had I only had a couple of quick questions with respect to the 5-year plan. And again, it is a plan based on a lot of different circumstances, outcomes, possibilities. But one thing that unfortunately continues to be a given is this level of continued increase in crime that is obviously costly in terms of human capital, but it is potentially costly in terms of not only what we need to spend to address crime, both from a preventive perspective, but in the aftermath of the commission of a crime. But the choices that people make in the city of Philadelphia as a result of crime. And again, I promise that report that we keep talking about is on. It's just about ready, and it'll be out in about a week. Have you all taken into account and factored the potential, assuming, and I hope I'm wrong, that this level of crime continues along this path for the next couple of years? Because this is this is a problem, as you all know. So how did you, when you address your plan, are you looking at certain factors as it relates to increases in resources for community organizations, increases for law enforcement, increases for different types of strategies that could potentially be used to address this criminal activity in the city of Philadelphia, and address the challenges that create, the underlying challenges that create this level of problems that we're currently having? I guess that's Mr. Engler.
Sure, I'll start, and then I'll ask Rob and Marissa to jump in to talk about the sustained investments throughout the plan. Our focus was really on FY23, trying to maximize the amount of resources that we could bring to bear on this issue, to your point, to make the greatest possible impact over the next several months, sustaining the investments that we know were started in FY22 and need to continue as we start FY23 on July 1, those grants to community organizations that needed to be sustained and continued, as well as some of the other programs that we know work, right? The READY program, which has been seen to work out of Chicago, our GDI program, those activities that we know will really impact violence. So that's why we focus in FY23 on trying to build on those things, and then also to build in resources to do evaluations, to better ascertain what's working so we can capitalize on that funding and expand it in future years. But Rob or Marissa, do you want to add anything on what's included in the plan for the next 4 years?
Good morning, Marissa Waxman, Budget Director. So obviously, as you mentioned, there's prevention and there's aftermath. We've talked about some of the investments that Jim just mentioned, the $184 million for short-term and medium-term sort of prevention and intervention work. And that's an 18.5% increase that includes $12 million in the additional dollars for community partnership. We also, when you ask about maintaining funding or assumptions we're making for funding in the aftermath, we are sustaining our funding and increasing based on the new contracts for the police department and other interventions. And then one thing I want to mention is in the aftermath, we also have to change some of our assumptions around, say, inmate population at the prisons, and making sure that we, know how many folks are going to be there and that we provide adequate food and medical services. And so those, when you ask about how are we making decisions about over the 5-year plan, those are some of the things we look at. What can we do now in terms of short-term interventions? What are the more foundational investments we need to make so that we can change this trajectory over time? And that's where you'll see the interventions around after-school programming, additional funding for the libraries, our educational investments, but also then looking at the reality of our current systems today.
Okay. The issues with respect to the longer term, i.e. the underlying issues that create this level, to create this environment where people ultimately turn to crime, or it creates certain aspects of that, they tend to be something that's going to take multiple years. As you go through this process, and you hear a lot of questions, the question is, the things that we know that work, that have worked over a period of time, investment in education, investment in infrastructure in communities, not the traditional infrastructure, but human infrastructure, that will create a better environment, and that will create its quality of life, the whole 9 yards. Is there a way that you all can kind of bake that into our long-term 5-year plan? One of the concerns that some people have that as administrations go, and you all, a number of you all will, move on. The mayor will move on, and we want to make sure that this, as I said, as we make these decisions for this particular year, that we do it in a way that could potentially carry over. We know every mayor wants to put their stamp on it, but some things need to be dealt with on a longer term basis, particularly those underlying issues. So I guess I really want to get a perspective on that. And with that, I want to ask you about the ARPA funds, recovery plan funds. There was some questions earlier, actually some questions by members of council about the investment of those dollars. I understand the finance director, you want to spread it out over 5 years to keep the budget stabilized. That's your mission, right? 5-year rob, that's what they call you. I understand that, right? That's your job, right? But there was a question about, well, do we make a broader investment early on in hopes of changing the narrative and changing the trajectory in terms of improving the lives, improving, the likelihood of things in our neighborhoods changing, and improving and investing in things that work that could create more jobs, more opportunities. And we talked about that last budget, and we didn't necessarily see that. Is there any more thought given to that, particularly when you look in the out years, that you have the potential of some much lower fund balances that suggest that somehow what we're doing is not really going to stimulate our economy? I know it's a long question, but I'm just trying to get it.
I'll take.
And I actually a couple of other, not to compare you to other mayors, but across the country, we looked at a couple of other municipalities, large cities. They did say, well, we're going all in early. We're going to take this money. We're going to spend this money now and to turn things around. So, Dave, you all given any thought to that?
Yes, I'll take your first question first and then ask Rob and Marissa to jump in on the ARP pieces. I think we have really focused on those long-lasting investments throughout the mayor's 6 years plus in office. When we talked about the return to local control of the school district, appointing a locally appointed school board, and making the substantial investments in education funding at the school district that we've made. That is part and parcel of that question. The first budget that we proposed, we talked about a beverage tax to fund pre-K and rebuild because we knew that those generational investments would have long-term dividends for the city of Philadelphia. We did that with the creation of the Office of Children and Families, trying to embed those programs in addition to the operations of Parks and Rec and Library with the DHS function, draw down and maximize the amount of funds we can draw down from other governments in support of children and families, and again, advancing that work that will have impact for generations. So that's really been a focus of this administration. You'll see that baked into the 5-year plan projections that we've made, and we'd love to see that funding sustained well beyond where this administration is, because we think it's the right thing to do, going forward. On the ARP side, before I turn it over to Rob and Marissa, that was part of the discussion that we had amongst administration leadership as we developed this budget proposal. What's the right amount of funding to draw down each of these years in order to ensure that we're balanced through the 5-year plan, because we have to present a balanced 5-year plan to PICA with reasonable assumptions, and to do it in a way and in investments that we think will make sense for Philadelphians. To your point, there are governments that are choosing to do it in different ways. Congress has given us the authority, given local governments the authority to spend the dollars through December 2024, and we will spend every dime of this before December 2024. And there's other governments that are handling it differently. I was on a call with several of the surrounding counties earlier this week, and they're still thinking of ideas on how to spend their money, because their bottom line was not as severely impacted as ours by the pandemic and resulting recession. So, Rob and Marissa, feel free to jump in, but I think we tried to make the largest drawdown that we could early in the plan to have that immediate impact. But we know that the impact of the pandemic is going to be here for years beyond when these dollars are usable.
Sure. A few things to add to that. One, we do assume that the economy gets stronger by the end of the plan. Looking at our tax revenue assumptions, tax revenues are $1 billion higher by the end of the plan than they were in 21. Part of that is because of the investments that Chief of Staff talked about that are only possible because of the ARP funding. Without the way we've deployed the ARP funding now, to try to make the investments that we're showing in the plan, we'd have deficit of over $400 million. So we are making investments that help grow our economy. You pointed out correctly, though, that is not translating into high fund balances at the end. And, because I'm 5-year Rob and I have to take an eagle eye view of where our finances are, that 60 million at the end of the plan does kind of constrain what we can do. And one of the reasons that we can't kind of push our way through to some of the stuff that other cities are going to do is we took a much bigger hit than almost every other city in terms of our revenue loss. And a lot of that is because of our reliance on taxes that are really sensitive to the economy, like the wage tax. I don't know if you want to add anything, Marissa.
Just to highlight Rob's point about the differential impacts, Pew did a study that showed that, we developed a nearly 15% budget gap, in part due to our reliance on the wage tax. Boston only developed a 2%. And so as a result, we have to make very different choices. It's almost like something sad happens, your great aunt Bunny passes away and you inherit money. If everything is fine in your life, you can use that, to do something, take a vacation. But if you've recently lost your job, you're going to spend that money covering your existing expenses, your rent, your dog food, whatever it is that you need to do. And so that's really why in some ways it's hard to compare Philadelphia and our use of the ARP dollars, since we're using it to replace the lost revenues. Everything we do with it is around making sure that we have the right balance of services for Philadelphians. And we've really shifted and evolved in the past couple of years what we do and how we do it. But we're not differentiating as much between, ARP dollars versus just what we need as a city for everything that we do.
All right. I promise this is my last question in terms of my abuse of my chairperson's privilege of asking the first round of questions. Real quick. We had a discussion, and actually I think we weighed in on the PICA expiration 2023. Did we have can you give me the status of what's going on with the Harrisburg legislation?
Rob, did you want to jump in on that?
Sure. The legislation was introduced. It's moved out of one committee. We think it's going to start moving pretty quickly. So we're still confident that legislation is going to pass and the PICA will be extended and will be around for decades.
Okay. All right. I've abused my time enough. With that, Chair recognizes Councilwoman Parker for questions. To the members, our first round, we're going to do 7 minutes, if that's okay with you all, and then we'll follow subsequent rounds. Councilwoman Parker.
Thank you, Mr. President. Trying to be disciplined. I set a timer, Mr. President. Let me just start by saying good morning, and I want to follow up on Council President Clark's first question, and that is, unless you are tone deaf in the city of Philadelphia, you know that public safety is the #1 issue in this budget process and on the minds of all Philadelphians. There was data that was previewed at a Pew virtual brown bag seminar March 29th. I think the report will be forthcoming. And it's from a January 2022 resident poll. And obviously, overwhelmingly, the issue of crime, drugs, and safety was the #1 issue on everyone's mind. So in the mayor's 5-year plan, one of his key priorities is a safer and a more just Philadelphia. And I couldn't agree with you all more. And so I think it affirms that we obviously need to double down on our anti-violence efforts while making sure we're measuring them at the same time. And I understand the importance of targeting funds and resources in the most high crime areas. I think of the terms hotspotting, and I've heard Commissioner Outlaw referencing the pinpoint strategy. But I want to firmly state that we can't neglect other parts of the city and solely focus on what we consider to be hot spots. It shouldn't be an either or. It must be a both and an and that's why I was proud to stand with my colleagues, community-based leaders across the city when we introduced last week the Philadelphia Neighborhood Safety and Community Policing Plan, which one of the 5-point thrust is that we get 300 more officers out in all neighborhoods across the city doing community policing. And for those who are not sure what that means, I'm talking about walking the beat and on bike patrol. With that being said, do you agree, this is the first question, that we must ensure that our police force is not only responding to emergencies and criminal activity and not only acting in a reactive manner? Do you agree that we need a police force that can act as a crime deterrent in a proactive manner by being embedded in a part of the very fabric of neighborhoods across the city?
Thank you, Councilmember. We do agree with that. I know Commissioner Outlaw is on and can talk about some of the strategies that the department has implemented to get more officers out on the street, talking to residents, talking to business owners. One of the key investments that we're making as part of this budget is in a mobility project with the police department to outfit officers with cell phones, so that way business owners, residents know the officers walking their beat and can get in touch with them when there's incidences or when someone's feeling unsafe or in various circumstances. So Commissioner, did you want to talk a little bit more about that project and other efforts for the department?
Good morning, everyone. Sure. My name is Danielle Outlaw, Police Commissioner, Philadelphia Police Department. I think it's no secret we've talked about this a lot, but I'll be more than welcome to talk about it some more. Pinpoint is our strategy that falls under the Philadelphia Roadmap for Safer Communities. And given the resources that we have, we are basically utilizing our staff, the staff that we do have, to be as proactive as we can and ultimately reactive in the areas that are hardest hit. In order to increase our visibility and our presence in those areas that we prioritize, we pull some officers out of plain clothes, put them back into marked cars and into uniforms. But to get to the point where we all want to see bicycle officers and more officers on foot citywide, we have to shift beyond robbing Peter to pay Paul. Because typically, we all know that the weather is going to get nice, spring and summer. We're going to be dealing not only with increased protection and security where our young people will be, but it's also making sure that we're visible and present for ATVs and dirt bikes and all the other issues that we're seeing throughout the city. In our beautiful city of neighborhoods, each neighborhood has their own issues, and we're working from the same cadre of officers in order to address those. So in order to do that,
Commissioner, I want to thank you for providing that response. I'm being really mindful of the 7 minutes, and I know we have several folks teed up. I just want to again affirm the need for us to have a proactive response and not to allow us to simply be responding to crime. And that's in every neighborhood across the city. Council President talked about the ARPA funds. I won't go into detail there. I just want to state for the record that the city needs more investment and we need more stimulus right now. I don't care if we're talking about gun violence, poverty, or static employment. We need to use more federal stimulus spending now and do it with a sense of urgency. I want to follow up though on my question in regards to workforce, and that is when thinking about the city of Philadelphia and our current and future workforce. This is somewhat related to my call for 300 more police officers to do community policing in neighborhoods across the city. We are never going to have a true community policing unless and until we figure out how to better recruit and retain police officers. The police department is effectively like in a race against time to maintain its current size, which is already it already has over 400 vacant positions. But before the pandemic, the department was graduating an academy class that was approximately every 3 months, and these were about 80 to 120 officers in size. In April of 2022, we'll be graduating a class of about 40 in size, and then another class, I believe, about 80 due to graduate in September 2022. However, at the same time, we're predicting to lose about a 1,000 existing officers over the next 4 to 5 years, and most of them due to retirement. So that equates to the police department, in essence, over the next 4 to 5 years, losing at least 200 officers a year. So my concern is that what I described for the police department is also true for other departments, meaning that we have a large number of vacancies as well as a large number of soon-to-be retirees on deck. Tell me, if you will, and if you don't have the information today, please get it to us at another date. The number of vacancies per department, the percentage of positions vacant per department, and if you have it, the average age of the employees per department compared to the average age of private sector employees, and estimates for soon-to-be retirees for the next 4 to 5 years, because it affirms our need to ensure that their pipeline, our pipeline, in our aging workforce is something that we need to pay a large amount and intentional attention to as we get through this budget process. Thank you, Mr. President. And if anyone from the budget office and/or HR has a response to that question, I would greatly appreciate it.
Thank you, Councilwoman.
Councilmember, I think we can follow up with the detailed information per department for your request. We are making investments through this budget in the Office of Human Resources, specifically targeted at recruitment. So I think we are hearing that call and responding to it with those additional resources, but we can provide the detail that you requested.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilwoman, and I'm sure we'll follow up with more questions about that. Chair recognizes Councilman Jones.
Thank you, Mr. President, and members of the administration. I want to start by saying that when I listened to the mayor's state of the budget, I could not help but think about what would have happened if no federal aid came from Washington to the states, to the city. What type of budget hearing we would be having right now. And I'm just thankful that we had the right team, legislative and administrative, to be able to accept that aid and be able to begin through this process, put it in good use. So that's probably the only compliment I'm going to give you during the whole budget, but hopefully you remember that. The second thing that I want to say is that there is an increasing amount of dollars that's coming for infrastructure repair. I remember prior budgets where we talked about the over 200 steps it takes for us to fix a road, build a bridge, deal with capital projects. Have we, A, been able to cut that down? And B, if we're going to get this influx, how do we reduce the 10-year backlog of capital projects that we have? And then C, how do we make it an equitable distribution of relief, in the sense that we don't have a director of the Office of Equal Opportunity and a reduced staff?
So thank you, Councilmember. On your last part first, on OEO, we were able to hire our new commerce director last week. It's day 8 for her in the office. And we do, I I can't go into greater detail because we're going through the vetting process, but we do have an offer out for the OEO director position as well. So the hope is that that person will be on board in the next week and a half or so once we're through the vetting, and we can start building back that office. It is without a doubt we lost a lot of talent in the Commerce Department and in OEO specifically over the last 6 months, and all kind of around the same time. So we are working as hard as we can to rebuild that team to meet this moment. And the infrastructure investment that we're talking about in this budget is really to build back the team we know we need in order to diligently spend the $1 billion that we're expecting to come to Philadelphia, through the bipartisan infrastructure law. So I asked Deputy Managing Director Mike Carroll to talk about some of the planning for that, and then maybe Stephanie Tipton, our Chief Administrative Officer, to talk about the elimination of some of those steps, because we have taken a lot of effort to reduce the number of steps it takes to complete capital projects and the procurement process.
Before he starts his answer to that question, I want to put on the record so that I don't get moved to second round. Why in the budget does the Police Oversight Commission come up under the Managing Director's office when it is an independent commission and should stand alone? Put a pin in that, answer the other question, and then they can ring the bell all they want.
Hi, this is Mike Carroll, Deputy Managing Director for Office of Transportation, Infrastructure, and Sustainability. Thank you, Councilmember Jones, for that question. And so I just want to say, the administration wholly endorses the priorities that you're laying out, making the process as streamlined as possible and really bring a real intention and focus to supporting Philadelphians from the perspective of diversity, equity, and inclusion, so that we're not just repairing things, but we're also building wealth and opportunity for Philadelphians. So, what I'll say is that this capacity building, I think, which Chief of Staff Jim Engler is talking about, has been the main focus. And so we're very gratified that the budget includes $20 million of operating funds to build back the capacity so that we can focus on these problems. We're going to have a multi-pronged approach. You talk about all the steps involved in getting projects done. A lot of that is imposed on us when we accept federal funds and work with the state to implement projects. And so we're very much interested in coordinating with our federal partners. I've had great conversations with Senator Casey's office and also with the Biden administration to really focus on how we can reduce some of that red tape and get projects put in place that are actually going to get done sooner, faster, employ more people with this equity lens, and help us clear the backlog so that we can take in the new funding. So in terms of hiring people, we've been very fortunate to be having good conversations. Of course, we did have to take a step back, as you mentioned, to make sure within government we've got the appropriate people in OEO and Commerce, but we've been working with the school district. We've been working with SEPTA, working with PennDOT to identify a regional approach so that we're not stepping on each other's toes, and so that we're coordinating on how we build capacity in terms of entry-level job opportunities for people, training for our young Philadelphians to enter the workforce and really look at infrastructure as an opportunity for themselves to build a career and build a life around. And we really need to do that, not just to get these projects done and, build wealth, but because we're seeing a generation change within our departments. A lot of folks are moving on to retirement and other things, and we've had issues in making sure we've got the workforce within government, and also when we look at the contracting community and we look at our other partners. So I guess the silver lining is we can do two things at once. We can bring people into the workforce and replace those important resources, these important people that we're seeing move on. And so we've got to make sure that we're in good alignment in doing that. Pooling our resources is the key.
So real quick, as a adjunct question, I'm glad to hear that we're working as a region to take a look at infrastructure and, in particular, transportation kind of remedies. We are growing in places. President Clark took us up to New York to look at traffic models and how to address traffic growth. And in my district, in the 4th District, I have 30 acres of stranded asset called the paper mill, because we don't have proper egress and bridges across into the counties to be able to sustain any growth that we would have in that area. So I would hope with this one-time infusion of federal money that we actually plan, there's a quote that says, society grows great when old men plant trees that they will never sit in the shade of. And I'm hoping that we take that approach as we look at these resources and assets. Thank you, Mr. President.
Councilman, where'd you get that from?
No, that's a Greek proverb.
Oh, okay. I was just wondering.
No, it wasn't mine. No, I will not plagiarize.
Thank you, sir.
But I was thinking about your comments when you said we have to plan ahead and use this time. I kid you not.
No, it was great. That's why I wanted to know the origin. It was awesome.
I'm going to send it to you.
Thank you, sir. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Gauthier.
Thank you, Council President. I'd like to start with comments and then move on to my questions. In order to provide all Philadelphians the quality of life that they deserve, we must be bold and innovative during this year's budget process. It's not news to anyone that we are at a critical juncture here in Philadelphia. We are on track to once again eclipse the annual record for homicides and shootings. Many Black and brown communities are in crisis, and people all over Philly are concerned for their well-being and for the future of this city. And while I appreciate the challenging position that the Kenney administration is in governing through a pandemic, we have to accept the reality that what we've been doing isn't working. Historically, we've taken a traditional approach to public safety here in Philadelphia, investing massive portions of the city's budget in things like policing and law enforcement. And today I want to suggest that we aren't directing nearly enough of our city's resources towards investment in communities that would enhance safety in our neighborhoods and allow people all over our city to thrive. With this year's proposed budget, Council is being asked to consider yet another set of budget increases for police and prisons. Meanwhile, let's consider the current state of affairs in many of our neighborhoods. Safe, affordable housing is out of reach for a disturbingly large and growing portion of our neighbors. Public schools are contending with dangerous, crumbling facilities in desperate need of repair. Our public libraries only have enough funding to stay open for several hours each weekday. They're operating on such a shoestring that any absence in any facilities issue can shut down an entire library. Shuttered amenities like the Sayre Pool are sitting unused and deteriorating year after year. Rec centers sit idle with broken plumbing and heating. Illegal dumping runs rampant with repeat offenders hitting the same locations over and over again with impunity. Streetlights burn out and leave pedestrians in the dark for months. Abandoned vehicles sit untouched, taking up parking and creating an eyesore. Blighted properties are everywhere, serving as havens for illicit activity and disincentivizing private investment and growth. It is urgent beyond words that we acknowledge the direct link between all of these issues, in other words, disinvestment in Black and working class communities and our gun violence crisis. While I'm pleased to see increased investments in anti-violence efforts in the proposed 5-year plan, it's going to take much more to start seeing it make an impact. It's going to take much more than drips and drabs of $1 million here and $2 million there, of pilot programs and grant opportunities that are hard for grassroots organizations to navigate. What could our city look like if we chose to invest $250 million or even $500 million towards anti-violence initiatives, opportunities for youth, workforce development programs, and dependable delivery of city services in neighborhoods in need? It's true that issues like gun violence and disinvestment are thorny and complex, but there are tangible steps we can take to improve conditions in our neighborhoods and to start chipping away at these persistent challenges. That starts with distributing city resources equitably and prioritizing the areas that need them the most. We need focused, place-based investments to send the message that these are neighborhoods that are cared about and important to our city as a whole. The fact of the matter is that all Philadelphians deserve to receive the same high quality of service from the city, and the city has an obligation to ensure the well-being of all of its residents.
The COVID pandemic led many of us to see our society systems in a new light and to comprehend on a visceral level that we can't progress as a collective if we are leaving behind the most vulnerable. The same idea applies here. If we want Philly to thrive and prosper and grow, it's absolutely critical that we focus our resources and attention on the communities and institutions that have been left behind for far too long. And with that being said, I'll probably get through one of my questions. During last year's budget negotiations, Council wanted to spend ARP funds more quickly than the administration did. The final agreed upon level of ARP expenditure for FY22 was $575 million, but it looks like the administration is only spending $250 million of that this year. That's less than half of what we agreed to spend. This is a drastic reduction in spending at a time when our core city services are floundering, leaving residents, mostly in neighborhoods outside of Center City, to suffer the consequences. And while I recognize that COVID has created unique operational challenges for our city government, why didn't we use the ARP funds available to us to make critical investments and to bolster these services, or at the very least, to build up capacity that would allow these services to expand and improve? As an example, the mayor's FY23 budget proposes a new $2.5 million investment to battle illegal dumping. That's a great idea, and I look forward to learning more about those plans. But why didn't we make that investment in FY22? And why are we stopping at $2.5 million? Couldn't we invest more across multiple city departments like L&I and CLIP to address a variety of quality of life issues and invest in additional lawyers in the law department to bring enforcement actions against our worst offenders?
Thank you, Councilmember. I'm sorry. Did you have something, Council President?
Who wants to handle that?
So there were a number of questions there. I think for the first one, I'll probably ask Rob and Marissa to take the ARP funding drawdown, and then we can talk about some of the streets department issues.
Thank you.
Sure. Yep. Under the federal law, we're supposed to spend that money by December of 24. And we look at that collective $1.4 billion as a resource we have over this 5-year plan to enable us to make investments and to sustain them. You know, so just what you're talking about, we want to make sure that we're making investments. We want to make sure that they last. We don't want to do things that we invest in 1 year and then they're gone. So part of what we're looking at is making sure that what we do lasts, you know, at least through this plan.
I guess I would just push back in saying we've had challenges with city services in my district that I think directly relate to public safety. We've had blighted properties that we've focused all of the resources of our office on that have become drug hotspots, that have been connected to shootings, that we've been unable to shut down and, you know, transfer to some other kind of productive use. I have a list of streetlights I've been pushing on since last summer in neighborhoods where there are frequent carjackings and shootings. And I guess I'm asking if the conservative nature of which, you know, that we're using these funds is really helping us.
I think it is. I mean, the things that you've kicked off are exactly where we're making investments in this plan. So, for example, one of the things that we'll be doing is, you know, a borrowing to improve streetlights throughout the city, because we understand that, you know, that's a major problem. As you pointed out, we're putting money into combating dumping. We're putting significant funding into the library to make sure that it can be open with, you know, sustainable hours. So we're doing the things that you're talking about because we understand that those are really crucial, and we could not have done that if we weren't getting the federal money.
Thank you. I know I'm done. I just want to say I'm suggesting that we need to take this opportunity to do more. There's no reason to have libraries open for 5 days and to not have them open for 6. And there's no reason not to be pouring services into neighborhoods that are incredibly distressed in this moment.
Thank you. You know what? I'm going to real quick follow up on the councilwoman's issue / question. So been around for a long, long time. I understand the annualized nature of funding, right? You hire a bunch of folks in the government to do certain things, and you have to figure out how you fund them over a period of time. But when you get an infusion of cash, such as we have under the recovery plan, the question is, like Councilman Jones referenced earlier about a tract of land, that if we were able to have a road, as an example of infrastructure, that allow that particular parcel to be developed, that will create annualized revenue as a result of the development of the site, as a result of the taxes that will be generated from that site. That's the kind of way you spend that annualized. That's the way you kind of spend that infusion of cash. So it frees up other dollars to spend for what the councilwoman is talking about in the budget process, because you're in a position to have more revenue coming. And that's what I think people from council I know are thinking about.
Yeah. So
building the budget gaps, if we can do a affordable housing development as an example, and I know the councilwoman has been on that issue for ever since she's been here. If there's a budget gap, we need $2 million or $3 million to build a 80-unit senior citizens affordable housing development. That's where we need to look at possibly infusing that cash to get that done, and then it will generate long-term benefits for not only the city of Philadelphia, but for the residents. So that's the thought, having talked with colleagues. How do we use that money and create an environment where we're able to benefit long-term?
Yeah, and that's one of the things we were thinking behind investing the $20 million in building our infrastructure capacity, so that we're using the money we have to now take advantage of the next set of federal funding, which is the Infrastructure and Job Act, to make sure that we can attract as much of that funding as possible to build the kind of projects that you're talking about. We also do in this budget, part because of the charter change, significantly increase our contribution to the Housing Trust Fund. It's one of the biggest increases in spending in the budget. It's about, I think, maybe $27 million. So we are investing in the areas that you're talking about.
Yeah. All right. I just think that we'd like to see a clearly defined plan. So when the councilwoman or whomever goes out to these community meetings, people want to know, what are you going to do, right? And if we have a clearly defined game plan for a neighborhood that has some level of despair, these people think there's some level of hope, right? Okay, we're going to develop this. We're going to turn these vacant lots into some productive use, all those kind of things. And that's the kind of thing we need to be able to communicate to the citizens of the city of Philadelphia. But anyway, I won't take anybody else's time. I'll move off of that, but I do think we should have some policy discussions around how we do that. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Bass.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I want to thank the administration for being here and my colleagues as well. I wanted to start off with just a couple of questions, and I really want to piggyback. A lot of what I wanted to say has actually been said in some way, shape, or form, because as a district council member, the responsibility for those streetlights that Councilwoman Gauthier referenced that aren't turned on, or for the violence in our neighborhoods, or for many of the other issues that we're facing on a day-to-day basis, they come to us. They come to us as their district council person, and at the end of the day, we are the responsible parties and the boots on the ground that they see, that they expect to have these matters addressed. And so while I appreciate what the administration has offered to do in terms of, putting, dollars here or dollars there, I feel that, like many of my colleagues, that we just aren't doing anything that's bold enough, that's going to transform where we are today to someplace better tomorrow. I think that most people just aren't getting that sense or that feeling. So I wanted to start out by asking you, Mr. Dubois, if you would give us a sense, or give us the number, not a sense, give us the number in terms of this administration's growth of the city budget just throughout this administration. How much have we grown this city budget?
So I think it's probably better, if it's okay, to take this from FY. We were about $4 billion when the administration started, and we're now we're proposing a $5.5 billion budget. The budget took a turn down, during the pandemic.
Sure, COVID. Yeah.
but we've been building back up since 21. In 21, we spent 4.7 billion. In this year's budget, we're projecting to spend 5.6 billion. So in those 2 years, we've increased spending by about $900 million. And I mean, to the point people have been making, that's only possible because we're getting that federal funding.
Okay. So we've spent, I'm just going to round it to $1 billion over the course of this administration. We also have access to the American Rescue Act funds, American Rescue Plan funds. And I think that when those funds became available, everyone in council, all of us, were really excited because we saw that there was the potential for getting us on track, keeping us on track, and that really just hasn't happened. I think that if you ask most Philadelphians how do they feel about the direction in which the city is heading, I think that they will feel that they haven't seen any sort of relationship between the growth of the city budget, the infusion of federal dollars, and the quality of life in their neighborhoods. And so, as I mentioned, a lot of my questions have already been asked, but I would really just like for you to help us understand, how we can expect to grow if we don't do something bolder or more transformative, because without, expecting that there's going to be a decrease in revenue, we know that there's going to be less city wage tax. We know that city sales tax is not exactly where we were hoping or projecting it would be. But without the revenue that we need, we can't have safer streets. We can't have cleaner streets. We can't address our education system. We can't have the more vibrant neighborhood commercial corridors that we desperately need, and et cetera, and et cetera, et cetera. And it's all about, the increasing costs, because as we know, the inflation is just through the roof right now, and the corresponding shrinking tax base is not helping. So I'm asking, I guess, if you can help us understand how we can better use these American Rescue Plan dollars to do something, outside the box. Was there anything else on the administration's table or that they were considering that we're not aware of at this moment that could be reconsidered? Because I just think that we have to do something more than what we're doing for the people of Philadelphia right now.
Thanks, Councilmember. So I'll note that the revenue loss from the pandemic was more than the additional federal funding that we received from the American Rescue Plan dollars. So the revenue loss that we've sustained from the pandemic and from the resulting recession, all the things you just mentioned, non-resident wage tax, all of those things, is actually more than the federal dollars that we received. So when we're talking about additional investment,
what do we calculate that loss as?
So at one point, without the federal money, we would have had a $1.5 billion deficit. We got $1.4 billion. So it was a great. It rescued us. It prevented a really horrible budget. It didn't close our full gap.
Okay.
So when you're talking about, and other council members are talking about new out-of-the-box investments, I think we're trying to be strategic about putting our dollars where we think it'll have the biggest impact, but knowing that we don't have a huge pot of funds to pull from as we're planning for our future. So that's why you're seeing the key investments that we're making in things like violence prevention, in street sweeping, in illegal dumping, and all of those areas that people have, in libraries, and areas that people have highlighted as priorities. We're trying to make as much investment as we can, sustain that investment, and have an impact. But understanding that our financial bottom line, while improved and rescued, to Rob's point, is not as healthy as it otherwise would have been pre-pandemic and as we had planned pre-pandemic.
Okay. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
That was it. Okay. Well, I understand the perspective, and I get it that we're being, just trying to cover our bases, but at the same time, covering our bases is just really not working in our city right now. It's not doing enough, and I just want to make the point, not to be overly critical, but just to put it in perspective. I know that there was a $2 million allocation to the streets department. Now, I work very closely with the streets department. I think that they work very hard. They're extremely responsive. But the trash, the dumping problem that we have in our city is way bigger than a $2 million problem. And I'm just going to use that as an example. I could use $2 million for cleanup and resources and trash cans and this and that and the other thing. In my district alone, in the 8th district alone, I could use $2 million to get our district, in my opinion, properly addressed, even though I know sanitation is working very, very hard to address these issues. So I just think that when we talk about the level of investment that we're making, that was the fastest 7 minutes. When I talk about the level of investment that we're making versus the outcomes, I don't see us being able to have the level of outcomes that people in our neighborhoods will look at and say, I can see a difference now. I can look at this budget and I can see a difference. I'll come back in the next round, Mr. President. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Brooks.
Thank you, Council President. So I also want to thank my colleagues for kind of just preparing me, so it's going to cut my question a little shorter. I was thinking also about the ARP fundings, and what was the rationale for not spending the money that we originally planned to spend? Because it sounds like we're unwilling to have those robust city services now. Prevention, intervention, and all those things are, should be what we're committed to. And it seems like we're more committed to use those funds to fund, incarceration and prisons in the future. So it seems kind of lopsided to me, and kind of reminiscent of past policies. And I was wondering, once this money, we have this money, this infusion of money, once in a generation type of support that we're seeing for the federal government, what are we going to do to make Philadelphia better immediately? And why it hasn't been an emphasis on spending this money now? Now when you think 2 days ago, kids are being killed walking home from school. These are the things that we need to focus on with some level of emergency, and these investments can be made in those preventive and intervention services immediately, as opposed to, something later on. And that's where I'm stuck on why we haven't spent the original money that we said we were going to spend for 22 or 23.
Thanks, Councilmember. So I think we are spending the money with as much urgency as we can in the areas that a number of that you and other council members have articulated as key priorities. The investments that are being made in areas like prisons are critical, right? Our inmate population has grown. Our workforce complement has shrunk. We need the investment there in order to provide services to keep people safe. There's ongoing litigation related to that, and we can't get into that on this call. But there's those investments that are being made there are critical. But in the other areas that folks have highlighted as needing investment, we are making that investment. And I think everyone would like to see, everyone would love to see more money going to certain areas. We have this money through December 2024. We're trying to spend it in a way that we can get it spent, have an impact, and sustain those investments beyond 2024 when the expenditure of those dollars is up. And I have to go back to my point to Councilwoman Bass, which is that the money that we've received is fantastic. And again, to Rob's point, it rescued us. It saved the city from disaster. But it did not even fully replace the revenue that we had projected pre-pandemic. So all of these investments that we're making to match the crises of the moment, the gun violence crisis, continuing response to the pandemic, the opioid crisis, all of the crises of the moment, we are making them coming from a base that is drastically smaller than it was 2 years ago. So I understand the call for urgency, and we look forward to working with council members to figure out how we maximize the impact of the dollars that we have throughout this budget process. But the areas that individuals have highlighted, we are making critical investments there.
I also want to highlight Councilmember Bass's push as an 8th district resident. I too believe that those $2 million could just, my district colleagues will advocate for that. And, to the point that I understand there was an urgency for the need of safety in the prison, but we both know that the prisons aren't safe, right? They aren't safe for the staff, and they aren't safe for the folks that are incarcerated. So, like, when I think of this sense of urgency around prevention and intervention, and making neighborhoods safer, whether it's through, clearing blight, and I think Councilmember Gautier talked about more community-based things. Those are the things that, we can do earlier towards intervention and prevention to prevent those large investments that we make over time in incarceration of young people. And that's where the urgency lies. How can we save the next generation from this huge loss with this once in a generation support that we received right now? And that's the urgency I feel that my council colleagues are talking about. Like, what are we going to do now to prevent tomorrow? And I think currently I don't really see that happening. And, to your point, I hear what you're saying, but I still have to put emphasis, because I think I've been number 4 or 5 out of my 17 colleagues have said basically the same thing. It's a sense of urgency that we see immediately. I do have, I'm not sure where my time is for my second question, and I don't want to start it and not finish it, but it's talking about racial equity. We spent a lot of time talking about racial equity. And I was wondering what actions have been taken to address long-standing racial inequities in the way that we collect revenue for the city. And I was wondering, have we, or has there been a way for the city to collect revenue that has been examined with a racial equity lens? Because we spend and we rely heavily on regressive taxes right now, whether it's a uniform wage tax or uniform property taxes, and over reliance on sale taxes. And we know there's uniformity clauses, but what have we thought about ways to make taxes more racially equitable for the city?
So I'll start there and then probably ask Rob and Commissioner Breslin to jump in, because it seems like it's more of a tax policy question than the Revenue Department. Am I right, Council Member?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So to your point, the uniformity clause doesn't allow us to have differential rates on certain taxes that may have a more inequitable impact on Black and brown residents, communities of color in Philadelphia, and that's a significant impediment. We've talked about that at length. I think the Revenue Department has the task of collecting revenue on behalf of the city based off of the tax rates that council sets. We've tried to have some real honest conversations within the government about racial equity, the systems that we perpetuate as a government, and trying to break them down. The process that we went through for the development of this budget, engaging our racial equity consultant, Equity and Results, to score each of the budget justifications that departments submitted to make new investments, and then funding the things that scored very high on that list. But from a tax policy perspective, to your point, our hands are significantly tied in the impact we can have on different communities. On other areas like the water department, for instance, we've continued the moratorium on shutoffs as we go through this pandemic, and are looking at policy changes we can make there to ensure that our collection practices are not negatively impacting communities that are suffering from poverty, and that people keep their water on. But I think that we have our hands significantly tied by the uniformity clause and by state law on the way and how we collect revenue.
Hey, Councilman. You
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was trying to find. So, I mean, you explained a lot, but I'm not really sure if I'm hearing how we have looked specifically on how we can do this. Like, is there another way that we can do this in order to generate the income that we need and make sure that it's not inadvertently affecting the same folks that we're trying to pull out of poverty?
So, Rob or Commissioner Breslin, do you want to talk about some of the Revenue Department's practices?
Yeah, I can start, and then Commissioner can add detail. We have some of the most expansive relief programs in the country. So, for example, on the property tax, we understand that property tax can be a burden for people. So we have relief programs that allow payment plans that actually have as low as $0 payments until people can actually make payments. So we try to make sure that our collection practices keep in mind the impact that the collections have. We have similar program on the water side, the TAP program. So we try to make sure that we have programs in place that take into account what you're talking about. Commissioner Breslin, if you want to add more detail.
Yeah, first let me say, the department participated in the first cohort of the DEI initiative this year, and we're trying to look at everything internally and externally from the department's perspective with the DEI lens. So that includes, our taxes and our collection processes. And as in Philadelphia, we do have some real constraints since we cannot have graduated tax rates, and the state constitution gives us a lot of restrictions in being able to address those types of concerns. So we're looking at it from a policy standpoint, but we're also, as finance director said, looking at it always from a collection and enforcement lens to try to make sure that we are protecting vulnerable citizens, and we've done that through our UPA, which is our owner-occupied payment agreement. So that allows people to stay in their houses even when they're delinquent in their real estate taxes. And we have payment agreements, believe it or not, as we've said, as others have said when they hear this, that, we have payment agreements that require no down payment and actually no payment for certain income levels to keep people in their houses. So we do have some of the most progressive programs in the country. But in the sake of time, we'll be on this afternoon. I'll be on this afternoon with my full team, and I'll have my deputy for policy and also my deputy for HR, who's leading our DEI initiatives, and we could talk further on this if you like.
I want to. Yeah. So I want. Can I?
Yeah. Can you? Because we're
wrap it up.
Get him when we come back or the second round. You don't have to wait till this afternoon. But we're.
Okay, we're just closing this.
And revenue's on this afternoon, and I'll have my full team.
Well, we'll have a second round.
Okay.
So Councilwoman wants to come back on the second round this morning.
Okay.
Here. All right.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Gim.
Thank you so much, Council President. So obviously, as we embark on this 2023 budget session, and our residents, families, and especially our young people are facing still like the greatest crises that we've seen. It's our responsibility to meet this moment. This budget session, we have to ensure, I think what you're hearing is that this budget session, we want to ensure that the investments we make are not merely on paper. They're clearly on paper. You can divide them out. You can show incremental increases, et cetera, et cetera. But the investments have to be felt and reached by the people and the youth who are in crisis, and focus on the actual work that's needed to make public safety a top priority for Philadelphia. And as the individuals on either side of a gun get younger and younger, I have to say, as the chair for children and youth, we are leaving our young people behind. The programs that we do around the libraries, around parks and rec centers, around school-based services, safe corridors, these are a tough on crime, all-encompassing part of a robust public safety plan, one that reaches into every single neighborhood and is a promise to every child that a public safety plan is as much about books, play, opportunity, and education as it is about policing and anything else. One of the challenges as we go into the 5-year budget session is that we break up into departments as opposed to division. And this is one of the few chances that we have with Jim Engler and with Rob DeBow and with the other, with you both as primary leaders, to lay out the vision for the next 5 years. That's really what this conversation is about. And I think that's what you're hearing. So, we have still struggled to not talk about public safety writ large, but to focus on some of our high-need communities, the 57 blocks, the 10 zip codes, and 25 schools, public, charter, and alternative, that need a specific rescue plan around violence, a management around guns and gun control that is devastating to them. So I want to underscore how important it is for us to look at this. And again, I think some of my colleagues have said this. I'm going to double up on it and then ask a few questions. So not a single public library is open on the weekends. Not one. When one of the things that we hear repeatedly from our juvenile justice side, especially for probation, is that they desperately need weekend and they need weekend hours. That the day they dread the most is Friday, because on Friday evening, many of the programs that traditionally serve young people who are high risk and at need start to close down, and they don't open until Monday morning. So we need programs that are open on weekends. That means we have to restore and take a look at Parks and Rec. The budget, I mean, maybe it's like on paper has just recouped from 2019, but all of us know that the massive changes that we've seen in Parks and Rec's budget means that they are nowhere near 2019 levels, even though it is consistently defined as a anti-violence strategy that's needed. And it's those kinds of things, an exponential growth in summertime and weekend activities for young people in zip codes most impacted by gun violence, that is missing from some of the levels of the budget, especially as you start to break up into departments. That's what I'm looking for, and I'd love to hear, you know, within a, and I there are a couple of other areas that I want to cover, but which includes revenue, but in terms of recovering and bringing our young people back to sanity and humanity, back to a place of loving support, where is that vision over the 5 years? Because I'm not seeing it, particularly if you look at this from the 5-year plan, from a vision of children and youth in neighborhoods most impacted by the gun violence that we've seen.
Thank you, Council Member. So I'll ask the representatives from the Office of Children and Families. I know Jessica Shapiro and Vanessa, who will be starting there next week, are on here, and they can talk about some of the summer planning work that's ongoing and will be sustained. To your point, we know that there are staffing shortages that are impacting library operations and Parks and Rec operations, which is why we are making investments in those two departments. The charter requires us to budget by department and by class, so it's not a vision heavy document. But the work that is happening in each of these departments is visionary and will have tremendous impact. So I'll ask maybe Jessica to start, and then we can filter into that.
And if I could, first of all, I think the conversations with Jessica, wonderful. And we are deeply engaged in this work. I actually want to push it back more to the upper level administration, above Jessica. It's not to say that she's on upper level, but above Jessica, because I'm going to challenge the Parks and Rec budget. That was increased by a few $1 million. I do not think that is a massive investment. I don't think it's meeting the needs. I don't think it's helping increase supports for individuals. And, I will also challenge that we want you to have a vision-heavy document for the 5-year plan. We want to see where the city is going. And by breaking us down into different departments and silos, what we don't get to see is the cohesive vision for where the city wants to go, particularly, and obviously I'm going to push on this, in a vision for children and youth. The city's violence is being driven by young people who do not see a plan for them. They don't see a vision for them within the city. So I'm looking back to you. I'm going to go in depth with Jessica. I'll go in depth with Catherine Level. I'll go in depth with Kelly Walker at the library. I've worked with them, and I actually believe that they're pushing. But I'm asking you, we did not invest in Parks and Rec at all, I don't think. I don't think we set a visionary plan for the libraries to be open on weekends. And I need to see more investments for these summertime weekend activities that is not constrict, that is, let me be careful because I want to be thoughtful about this. But, we have to be driven as much by need as we do by resources. We have to understand the need within communities in order to readjust our resources. If we simply go back and say that we're constricted by resources, we'll never meet need. We'll never meet need, and we'll never reconstruct back towards that. But, you know, I don't think you've invested in Parks and Rec, and I don't think you've invested nearly enough to give me an outcome I can believe in for the libraries, that they'll be open on weekends. So I wanted to see if you could respond to that.
Sure. So I'll say that we have made investments, significant investments in the library and in Parks and Rec. I understand it doesn't meet the need that you've articulated. We have a ton of need and not enough resources to meet that need, period. We have more need than we have resources to meet in a number of different categories. So when we look at a budget, we try and fulfill as much of the need as we can in key areas to have impact and to have sustained impact. So I look forward to having continued conversations throughout this budget process for areas where we need to make adjustment to meet the need in more areas as articulated through the priorities of council. But we have made investment in those areas, and it may not meet the need that's been articulated either by members of the community or by city council, and those decisions are based off of the resources we have at hand to meet that need in every category, from Parks and Rec and library and the Office of Children and Families to police and corrections and streets.
Council President, I'll wait for the second round for mine, but I had just one clarification. I understand you've made an investment in the libraries.
Councilwoman, 1 second, please. Councilwoman Bash, you had a point of information. Was it on the question or was it on the response?
Thank you, Mr. President. It was on the response from the administration from Mr. Engler. I didn't know if he was aware when Councilwoman Gim asked him about the libraries and when the response was related to staffing issues. I don't know that Mr. Engler is aware that in the 8th District, we opened up, along with N1, which is a recruiting firm, we opened up a jobs bank within the library at Nicetown. And so we have reached out and asked the administration to partner with us to help staff the libraries through the jobs bank that the City of Philadelphia and our office and that libraries are running together. So I just wanted to put that out there, that if we're really serious about getting staff, we have a professional organization that's working with us to go out, recruit, and hire, and we can do that specifically for the libraries, and we've made that overture in the past, and I just wanted to publicly on the record state that we are certainly willing to work to make that happen, to staff these libraries, because they need to be open. Thank you, Mr. President.
You're welcome. Councilwoman, you had a last.
Yeah, I just wanted to conclude my statement because I'll wait for the next round, but I did just want to make clear that no matter what the investment may be, on the libraries front, if the libraries open on weekends, this is what I'm saying, that it can't just be a measure of the money that's on. It's got to be articulated by the residents and community members. No library is open on the weekends. A library needs to be open on the weekends. And if the investments are made, it doesn't mean the outcome meets the quality of the investment that is requested. So that was my only concluding thing, and I'll wait for the next round, Council President.
Okay. Thank you, Councilwoman. Chair recognizes Councilman Don.
Thank you, Council President, and good morning, everyone. I have a few comments and then a few questions, but I want to just clarify on the coronavirus spending or the program that's available from the federal government. I wanted to clarify if those monies have to be allocated by 2024 or spent by 2024.
Okay.
They have to be obligated by the end of 24.
But not spent by the end of 24.
They have to, so there you can get like a little lag after, but they have to be obligated. So we have to show that they're committed to something and obligated under a contract, for example, even if the payment comes after December 24. But we have to have obligated the funding by the end of calendar 24.
Well, I don't know if it matters. I'll just share it with you. It's in the new regulations. It does say that it must be obligated by December 31, 2024, but it doesn't have to be expended until December 31 of 26. I don't know if that helps, but I just want to put it out there. That's in the new regulations from the president. In the areas of comments of my colleagues, I agree with most everything that's been said. I'm not going to repeat any of those questions or comments, but I agree with the majority of them. And number one issue, of course, is public safety. And I'm just curious how the measurement of public safety is going, and I have a series of questions I'm just going to ask. I'd like to know how that this money we've invested in council, the $155 million, how that is being measured, so we determine which programs are successful, which ones aren't. I will just also share on the long-term goals of the administration, and I think of this council. I don't see us having really goals of changing the poverty in the long term, and I selfishly say that because I've been saying for 6 years, if we want to change poverty in the long run, we should be changing what we're teaching in schools. We should be teaching from kindergarten to 12th grade financial literacy, technology, entrepreneurship, and then allowing students in 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th grade to work 1 day a week, go to school for 4 days, get paid, get a job, and get a summer job from those companies. It's invaluable. Won't happen changing poverty in the next 5 or 10 years, but 15 to 20 years from now, it'll change the course of the city. I won't be here, but it'll change the course of the city. Anyway, and I'd like that to be addressed somehow. I also want to talk about, and I know my time's limited, I want to talk about the police headquarters relocation. And I just want to make sure I have the story straight, because it concerns me of how we manage money, taxpayer money, and how we invest taxpayer money. And I think I believe the story is that after a lot of deliberation back in time, former police commissioner Charles Ramsey and I believe Mayor Michael Nutter decided to relocate the police headquarters from the aging roundhouse to a 4601 Market, the former Provident Mutual Life Insurance building in West Philadelphia. And in 2014, Councilman Kenny and the rest of council approved up to $250 million in borrowing to fund moving the police headquarters there. That same year, we issued bonds and got $65 million from investors who we agreed to repay with interest through 2044 for a total of $117 million. We spent $50 million from those bonds to buy the building and start turning it into the next police headquarters. We all got the way through. We got almost all the way through the interior landscaping design for the new headquarters. And then in 2016, Mayor Kenny decided to abandon the efforts at 4601 Market. We sold the building for $10 million. I think two of us, myself and Councilmember Sanchez, voted against that, after the city had spent $50 million there and agreed to fund the purchase and redevelopment of the former Inquirer building for a face value of about $280 million. But instead of just funding the acquisition and renovation of the new headquarters, the administration agreed the city would lease the building for a total of about $140 million over 9 years, up to $15.6 million per year. Then the developer qualified for $40 million in federal tax credits. After that 9-year rental period, we'll have the option to either keep renting the police headquarters or buy out what's left on the fixed rate 3.75 interest 19-year financing that's estimated to cost us about $353 million. And now that we've changed our minds, thrown away millions, delayed a few years, and finally finished the renovation, we decide to mothball a few of the upper floors of this building we're paying hundreds of millions for. So from the time Mayor Nutter decided to move the police headquarters from the roundhouse to the time the city will fully own the new police headquarters in the former Inquirer building, how much total money will we have spent on this relocation is question one. And then question two is, I'm concerned about what's coming up next, because this inconsistency is part of what makes it hard for people to trust that city government has their best interests at heart. So when it comes to deciding what to do with the roundhouse, what are the steps we're taking to make sure the city's approach is more professional and less costly to our taxpayers?
A couple questions there. Do you want us to handle the police headquarters questions first, or the poverty questions first?
It's your decision, whatever you like.
Let's take the second part first, and then we come back. So on the police headquarters move, I think your timeline is accurate. When we came into office in 2016, the mayor asked us, and the new police commissioner, time Commissioner Ross, asked us to look at that project and whether it was right to move forward with that project or to look at other potential relocation. After looking at the potential sites, the Inquirer building was chosen as the best possible site. And it did free up the 4601 Market site for additional redevelopment. To your point about the sale, the eventual services that are going to be provided there by CHOP and PHMC will be substantial and tremendous benefit to the West Philadelphia community that will be able to access them in the neighborhood. So we're really happy about where that project has ended up. To your point about the additional space in the new police headquarters building, we're having those conversations right now with public property. As you can imagine, the pandemic has shifted the way that the city provides services, the way that our office spaces are structured, the way our office spaces are designed, and the amount of people that are in the office 5 days a week as opposed to in a more hybrid environment, and how much square footage they need. So with the Department of Public Property, we're reviewing now how we can best fill that space, so that way it's best utilized. And then I'd probably ask the finance director to talk about some of the costs related to the project.
Yeah, I think the one place where we differ with your numbers on the project or what the purchase price will be, there's a formula that would have it be the higher of the remaining debt service or the value of the property. So rather than the 350 you're talking about, we think that number will be more like in the 200 range. So it'll be that cost plus the rent payments over the 9 years.
So I guess my question is, though, between 46 and Market and the Inquirer building, what was the total amount of money that's being either lost or invested or spent, whatever way you want to call it? What's the total taxpayer cost?
We'll put a table together that shows all of that for you.
Because my concern is that we now have the Roundhouse coming up, and how are we going to deal with that? And I don't want to go through this again on the Roundhouse. We can't go back. I just want to move forward. I just don't want to have the same situation.
Understood.
And on that development, we're going through a community engagement process now for the Roundhouse development. I believe the community engagement consultant is being selected this week or is under contract shortly, and we'll start that community engagement process. We thought that was really critical for that project, to really engage with members of the close community as well as the city at large, because that building has a lot of historical significance for all Philadelphians, and we want to make sure that the redevelopment of it matches the vision that our residents would like to see.
Okay, I'll look at the chart. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, Council President.
Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Gilmore Richardson.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, Council President, and thank you to our administration partners for your testimony. I'll just start by saying that I do agree wholeheartedly with the concerns raised by a number of my colleagues relative to public safety and the quality of life issues here in the city. But I wanted to start by giving kudos in this process because over the last year, I have worked really hard to be a partner with our administrative partners. And I recognize the work we all are seeking to do to make things better on a daily basis. So I just wanted to quickly thank Deputy Commissioner Warren from Streets, who we call on almost every single day, and Commissioner Williams, L&I, Commissioner DePietro, and I'll go into the work that we've been working on in my first question. Parks and Rec for the constituent case, just I think last week, revenue for the issues we're working on around tangled titles, and the Records Department, our commissioner, who has been wonderful, and the Register of Wills office, and so many of you all across city government. But I also want to thank members of the Philadelphia Police Department, namely Captain O'Donnell in the 17th, and Captain McKeever in the 19th, Inspector Rodriguez in the 18th. For the past several weeks, it has been my honor and privilege to go out with members of the police department between the hours of 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. In those particular districts to look at the implementation of two pieces of legislation that I passed here in this body. The first one being an updated curfew to simplify curfew hours in the opening of community evening resource centers in our South and Southwest divisions. And then also looking at the enforcement of the drug paraphernalia legislation in our city and looking at a lot of these nuisance businesses. And so we all recognize that in the budget community recap, one of the top community concerns was public safety. And everywhere I go, all Philadelphians I hear from, they voice concerns about these issues, but particularly about these nuisance businesses that are really popping up all over the city. And I talked to you about last year about this drug paraphernalia legislation and how we've been able to enforce on these businesses that are skirting the zoning code and popping up almost on every commercial corridor. If you're anywhere in the city, you see these businesses selling drug paraphernalia. Most of them do not have the proper licensing or certification to operate. They have not gone through zoning or any type of community process. And just recently, we had a shooting outside of one of those locations for actually a store we're slated to visit at the end of this month in the district of our Majority Leader, Councilmember Parker. And so the Nuisance Business Task Force is really one of the most valuable interagency working groups we have in city government. I wanted to talk specifically about any new investments to expand the task force work in this proposed budget, particularly around L&I inspectors, particularly for the Department of Health and for PPD, so that we can have a robust nuisance business task force that can handle the challenges we are faced with around these nuisance businesses. What we have now is not enough to get to all the locations where we have complaints and where we know they are operating without the appropriate licensing and certification in our city. So I wanted to start there. And the second question, because I want to get in my questions in the first round, is around L&I inspectors. We know they're very highly trained professionals, and they're very challenging jobs to fill. We do rely on them for a significant amount of our enforcement to address these quality of life issues in our communities. So I wanted to know why we are not providing additional dollars to hire more inspectors and to better retain our highly skilled inspectors and our workforce. And then lastly, how is the mayor's office prioritizing the enforcement of quality of life issues in our neighborhoods overall? And I say that because we have gone out in almost every council district and we're working our way through in the evening to look at these drug paraphernalia stores. And like I stated, I've recently started to go out on Friday nights between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. We need a lot of help with quality of life issues, and we need to see that prioritized in this budget. So those are my initial three questions.
Thank you, Councilmember. I see two more popped up. So I was going to ask the Managing Director's office and then the operating departments to take those questions. To your last point around the prioritization of quality of life issues, from the mayor's office perspective, it's something that the mayor cares deeply about. When he's out in the community and sees various quality of life issues, it comes back to us, which means that we're focused on it. We meet weekly on not only on a violence prevention basis, but also specifically focused on quality of life issues related to Kensington and other neighborhoods that are dealing specifically with those various issues. So it's something that he's personally invested in. We can talk in more detail on later, but I'd like the operating departments to talk about some of the specific issues you raised.
Yeah, Jim, I was calling on Commissioner DePietro to talk specifically around the nuisance task force and the work that's being done between those folks, the district attorney's office, law department, and certainly L&I. Councilwoman, to your overall question around budget investment, I think, we as the administration come up with a budget and then understanding that we're working with council, starting this process today to talk through that and understand that there's some needs that we may not have to the satisfaction of council members in our budget that will be part of that back and forth discussion as we get through this process. But Ralph, you want to?
And Mr. Managing Director, before Commissioner DePietro responds, I just want to say for the record that Commissioner DePietro has been out with us, okay, on those tours all throughout the year, in the evening, at nighttime. Even one of the most challenging situations that I've ever faced, period, in my life, he was there with us. And so I want to give kudos to the commissioner because I know he is doing the very best that he can with the resources that he has. But this process is about what we can do to prioritize quality of life issues and make it better. And if it's simply adding additional resources to the Nuisance Business Task Force and to L&I so that they have the appropriate staffing to address these concerns, and I think we should work towards that end in this process. And so I just wanted to be clear on that because we have been working hand in hand with them. It's just tough when, like everybody, we're faced with staffing challenges that prevent us from doing all that we can for people in the community. I guess we'll have to come back on the second round because I will honor the clock, Council President. I will come back on the second round and we'll hear from Commissioner DePietro. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Councilwoman. Thank you for doing what you do. One of these days, I'm gonna actually ride along with you, but maybe when you do some daytime hours, I don't know about that 10 to 2 thing. Thank you so much. Chair recognizes Councilman Thomas.
Good morning, everybody. Afternoon, everybody. At this point now, I'm going to use my 5 minutes to ask all of my questions, and I know you won't have time to respond to all of them. So I'll let the council president determine how that ends up taking place. Just sitting here listening to some of the responses, Mr. Engler talked about the fact that the budget wasn't a visual document, like it's not the vision of the city. So at some point, please show us the document that has the vision of the administration, because we're a little concerned right now with the direction that we're going in. Similar to my colleagues, this issue of gun violence is a huge problem. In 2021, we've seen 242 children shot, 36 fatal. In 2022, we already have 57 children shot, 16 fatal. So my first question, and I'll go through all of them now, is, and similar to what other council members said, how can we say that gun violence is a priority when rec centers are only open 5 days a week? Think about the fact that with all the crime that we see with teenagers and involving teenagers, that somebody can play football or baseball on a Saturday, and if they have to go to the bathroom, they can't even go into the rec center to use the bathroom because we have them closed in the midst of a gun violence crisis, while also having a surplus amount of money. So think about that message that we're giving to the constituents of the city of Philadelphia. We have 100,000 people who that we said that we will pull out of poverty. So how can we not say that right now is the moment where we need to invest significant dollars in the city of Philadelphia when we committed to pulling 100,000 people out of poverty, and we're not moving in that direction at all? I also looked through the budget and I'm wondering, why is there no funding for the African American Museum? We wanted to see significant investment in the African American Museum, especially with the capital campaign that they have going on. And it's unfortunate that we didn't see a significant line item, not the $500,000 that they annually get. We're talking about significant investment in the African American Museum. I'm also disappointed that I didn't see any language around the 12% of roads that produce 80% of the car accidents. This is something that we discussed last budget. I was assured that we would see significant investment in infrastructure when we got the ARP money, and there is nothing in there around that. Similar to what my colleague said, the lack of investment in L&I is extremely disappointing. The report from the Arts and Culture Task Force talked about the importance of investing in L&I. L&I currently is significantly understaffed. They only have about 370 staff members over there, and there's no plan or no vision to invest in technology, to use technology, to be able to find bad actors and actresses and have that revenue be revenue that we generate for the city of Philadelphia. I heard folks talk about libraries a little earlier, but overall, we always, I'll say this and I'll stop and then I'll let you respond. The elders told me when I first got involved in politics is that politics is the allocation of scarce resources, which basically means that there's not enough resources for everybody. So when we say, we have a lot of different departments that have needs, well, that's been the case since I've been born. At the end of the day, we recognize that there are always going to be departments that have needs, but it's our job and our obligation to meet the needs of the moment. And right now, I don't see us moving in that direction. So I'll stop right there and I'll look forward to some responses to some of the questions and statements that I made.
Thank you, Council Member. I'll go through them in the order that I wrote them down, but I may miss some, so I apologize for that. We can talk about it again. So as to your point around vision, my point to the council member was that we budget by department and by class, so it's hard to articulate the vision out of the budgetary document. The 5-year plan, though, does set specific goals, and the 5-year plan goals for each department are included in there. And our vision for how we address violence prevention is the roadmap to safer communities. It's been that way for several years, and we continue to build on that as the base for how we address surging violence. The funding for the African American Museum, you are correct. There's $500,000 for operating support for the African American Museum. We are in, I'll say, early discussions about capital needs, whether that's a new site or capital improvements at their existing site that are ongoing discussions. Hopefully they are resolved by the time we get to June so they can be included as part of this budget, but it didn't make sense to put specific capital funding in related to, again, a new facility or something else entirely until we're through those discussions.
Mr. President, point of information.
Chair recognizes Councilwoman Gilmore Richardson.
Yes, thank you so much, Mr. President. For the record, I just wanted to ask the administration to detail the amount the African American Museum received last year.
Rob or Marissa, do you have that?
Hey, if I'm correct, Rob, and let me try, Rob, and let me know if I'm incorrect. Councilwoman, I believe they received $800,000 last fiscal year. This year, they're slated to receive $500,000. I think the $800,000. I think the $500,000 is what they've been consistently getting pre-pandemic. There was a cut during the pandemic. Afterwards, I think working together with council, we did increase that money for them. But this year is $500,000. Last fiscal year was $800,000.
Thank you. Just wanted that information for the record. Thank you, Council President. Thank you, colleague, Councilmember Thomas.
Thank you, Council Lady.
Thank you. And then I'd ask Deputy Manager Director Carroll to talk about the Vision Zero issues that you raised around specific streets issues.
Thank you. We may need to get back to the council member with more detail, but I just want to assure you that we are investing heavily in Vision Zero, especially in the high injury network that you identified, which is the 12% of streets where 80% of the killed and seriously injured Philadelphians are involved. I would point out that we do continue to rely heavily on grant funding for that investment, and we'll be moving forward a number of grant-funded projects in the FY2023. Also, I would go back to describe the investments that we're making in the infrastructure funding, the federally funded infrastructure work, building the capacity to deliver even more projects. That all doesn't appear yet in the category of Vision Zero, but that is going to be heavily slanted towards safety projects focused on the high injury network.
Is that it?
Yes.
Councilmember?
No, I know my time is up. Thank you, Council. I don't hear a horn, but I know it's coming. I timed it. Thank you, Council President. I know my time is up. And what I'll say is that I'll be
sure to address each one of your questions.
They didn't, but it's okay. I'll be sending over a memo with the information as it relates to the 12% of the roads, because that's extremely alarming and disappointing that we've been talking about this since 2020. It's 2022. We're in the middle of a crisis and we're doing nothing about it. I'll also be sending a memo over around L&I because, again, at the end of the day, when we're looking at this issue around L&I, this is an opportunity to generate revenue for the city without increasing taxes for people or for businesses. So thank you, Council President, and I'll cue myself in for the second round, and I am going to continue to be a strong advocate as it relates to this hit and run issue because we're just not seeing the type of traction that we need to see as it relates to infrastructure investment. Thank you, Council President.
Thank you, Councilman. You're not going to believe this. Someone from my staff just came up and informed me that somebody actually hit my city vehicle sitting outside, parked in this legal location, and apparently it was a delivery truck, and apparently it did not stop. It hit and it ran. So we clearly understand. Fortunately, no one got hurt, but this is a clear example of what you're referencing. Thank you. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Quinona Sanchez.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you to the administration. I want to talk a little bit around public safety, but from an operational department perspective. My colleagues have talked very eloquently around some of the programming issues that I'll probably get into the second round. You know, this administration came in, talked about zero-based budgeting. We moved to performance-based budgeting. You know, Mr. Engler, is this budget a reflection? And again, there's some investments in departments that are important, streets department, all of that. How are you making a decision about the amount? So, for instance, if we have 10,000 potholes, do we have money to fill 10,000 potholes? If we know we have, PHS's budget with 30 million square feet of vacant lot that they take care of, does this budget reflect what it costs to take care of those issues? We have the historic illegal dumping that's going on. How did you come up with how we make those investments? And are we budgeting for what we have or what we need? And how does council know the difference between those two? Because operationally, street light, vacant lots, trash, the L&I enforcement, those are public safety issues and quality of life issues. So how did you guys come up with the amount, and what does it really resolve in those investments?
So getting back to your one of your points, budgeting for what we need versus what we have, it's a little bit of both. Looking at various departmental budgets to either sustain their current operations as well as enhance the things that they do or can do better or can do more of, is how we generally look at the budget. I'd say we do have funding to fill potholes. We do have funding to provide all of those services that the department needs. Those costs escalate over time, which is why you see department budgets increase. And especially now with inflationary pressure that's impacting every department. So it's a little bit of both. When we look at building the budget, it is about the needs that are articulated by residents, by community members, priorities outlined by the mayor, in discussion with various other administration officials, and then taking the resources that we have and matching it to that need.
So if someone would ask us, we know we have this historical dumping problem, we know where the people dump all the time, this budget gives the streets department enough money to keep all those dumping sites clean, does it?
I think this budget gives the department more resources to be able to address the issue of illegal dumping. There's also more that we know that we can do on the regulatory side. When we had a budget briefing for the state legislature, we talked to Representative Hohenstein about state legislation that he might be interested in supporting to help us go after illegal dumpers more significantly. There's also ongoing discussions with our law department and the district attorney's office about how we can be more strategic in going after illegal dumpers. So not just resolving the issue and cleaning up the mess, but also holding people accountable for their illegal dumping and their illegal activity. So I think,
street lights, all of these things add to how people feel around public safety from an operational standpoint. And again, like my colleagues, we work with streets department and CLIP and all those other things. I just want to make sure, I mean, if you're attesting to, and as departments come up, we'll talk about, what it is that we're charging them to do and if we're giving them enough resources to actually get it done. I want to go to the public safety, in particular the criminal justice components of it. There's a lot of always discussion about the police department. We've had a lot of debate with the DA and talking about the DA. I was very disappointed to see the lack of funding in the public defender's office. All of these are reaction after a crime is done. What I haven't heard from the administration in articulating its public safety strategy is what is the underpinning that we're putting in as it relates to DHS and CBH to support the folks. We know who the next victim is going to be. We know, because they're in our system, who the next shooter is going to be. How are we supporting those systems on the intervention investment so that when a young person is in one of our diversionary programs, we are supporting them in a way to make sure that they don't become a victim again? How are you looking at those investments from a public safety strategy?
Absolutely, Councilwoman. So that is part and parcel of the entire public safety strategy as outlined in the roadmap. We've gone forward and opened our evening resource centers, and but several more planned to open in this budget. And as you know, the vast majority of funding for those agencies, DHS and DBHIDS, comes from other governments. So they're not included in the general fund allocation. Some of the funding is in the general fund allocation, like the evening resource centers I mentioned, crisis incident response teams that were in my testimony. But the vast majority of their funding comes through those other big pots of money from either the state or federal government. And it's all targeted at that same approach. And if there's specific questions, I'm sure Commissioner Ali or Dr. Bowen are happy to jump in and answer questions.
When those questions come up, I was looking for a kind of a statement about we've charged these departments with really helping provide that immediate intervention in a different way. A lot of this is fee for services. A lot of this is in the CUA system. And one of the complaints, whether you're talking to CUA members or parents who are interfacing with CUA members, is sort of sometimes what needs to be fixed is simple, and we can't fix it, right? It's a housing instability issue. It's something that's broken in the household that leads us, from removing children from homes and stuff. So that's what, and we'll talk about it then. I was just looking for a bigger conversation. As it relates to the Criminal Justice Advisory Board, this feeling of lawlessness comes from police don't arrest, DA doesn't charge, courts are releasing people, public defenders are left out of the conversation. What has the mayor's team done, said, or provided in terms of bringing this leadership together that we all fund to say, folks, this is not a pointing of the fingers anymore. This is what we're going to do. This is the expectation. And how is that reflected on the budget accountability for them?
Sure. I'd say we do that on a daily basis. One specific example is through the reinstitution of drug court, or the ARD program. So we had a lot of conversations with the district attorney in the First Judicial District about how to restart that program. We ran into an impasse because the DA said that they didn't want fines or fees to be an impediment for people to be in the program, and the court said that people needed to be up on their fines and fees in order to go through the program. So we said, from a city perspective, we will allocate our scarce resources to pay for those fines and fees so that individuals can go through that program and we can get them through the program, rehabilitated and back on with their lives. And we think that'll have a significant impact, a significant cost associated with our budget. So those kind of problem-solving issues are happening on a daily basis, whether that's through the managing director's office or through other areas of the government, trying to improve the way that we provide public safety services up and down the spectrum, from the police department all the way through to prevention, as you mentioned.
I appreciate part of those conversations. Okay, on the drug court, I know we've been part of those conversations, and I know it was difficult to get through. But that's one of like many examples around how do we get to like people feeling that our system works, right, and that people are not operating off of islands, right, and there's a consistent messaging around public safety. And I just think when you go to community meetings, people they're this problem, and consistent messaging is based on people's experiences, and I'm not getting that on a daily basis, right? And it's frustrating because people don't separate government. When I go to a meeting, it's not about the prison, it's not about the courts, it's about you guys in the city, and so we have to tell people some of these challenges, right? And we have to hold these departments who use bureaucracy to limit the ability for us to just help people, right, and get things done. And I think we need to be more public around that. I'm sorry, Tumar, did you want to say something?
Point of information, Mr. President.
Councilman Jones had a point of information.
Yeah, I think as it relates to what Member Sanchez talked about, we spent 2 years doing a 100-shooter review that turned into 2,000-shooter review. And within that, there was a sense of cooperation between all parties. We finished that document and we put it on a shelf. The question becomes, who picks it up off the shelf and integrates it into our budget on a daily basis and on a team basis? Daily basis is individual communications between departments, but on a team basis, who is the straw that's going to stir the drink that points to the solutions that get paid for through our budget?
Thank you. Thank you, Councilman. I don't know if that was a question or
it was a little of a statement and a lot of need for response.
Okay. Anybody want to grab that?
I will say my programming conversations for the second round. I will say that we've been missing the public safety conversation around 911, which I hope, and in this as part of this global plan, because all of these things are connected, and public safety makes people feel better if they can interface with our systems in a way that's predictable. So thank you very much, Council President, and Mr. Engel.
Thank you, Councilwoman. So we actually we're scheduled to take a break at 12:30. We have Councilman Green up next. There have been a number of inquiries today.
I'm sorry, Council President. Councilman O, I think, is next, or maybe it's Councilman Green. Am I wrong? Did I miss that? I didn't get my first round.
I'm sorry, sir. I'm sorry. You are Councilman Green and then Councilman O. I'm just based on the information that's being fed to me. And then we want to take a break, and I know there were a number of inquiries in the first round, some of which I'm assuming you'll be able to come back and respond to from members of the administration. Would be helpful if we can get a little deeper into some of the more specific. So Councilman Green and then Councilman O.
Thank you, Council President. Good afternoon, everyone. I have a few quick questions. How much money was spent? How did the city spend the CARES dollars?
So we can get you specific breakout on the CARES dollars.
Well, I don't need the specific breakdown, but I know you have a general understanding of how much was spent either in other areas.
Was spent in reacting to the pandemic for things like the isolation and quarantine sites, the PPE, providing medical care where necessary. So it was that whole range of responses to the pandemic.
But none of the CARES dollars were spent for arts groups or other organizations like that, or other groups that were impacted by the pandemic.
Now, there was money through the first round that was provided for small businesses. There was also a fund that we set up to provide money to arts institutions. So there was funding that went to those organizations.
And with CARES dollars?
I'm not sure whether it was CARES dollars. I know there were federal streams. I'm not sure whether it was the CARES bucket.
Yeah, my understanding that the vast majority of dollars that we spent as a city with the CARES dollars went to public safety, PPE, some of the other things you talked about, but other type of organizations that were really impacted by the pandemic, those dollars were not spent there. I think that was American Rescue Plan dollars that were spent for those areas, or we used some of the money that council provided, that $84 million, to provide resources to small businesses and others, which came out of general fund dollars.
Yeah, we cobbled together whatever streams we could, but that's right. We did have emergency needs that we funded with those CARES Act dollars.
Right. So for the most part, we prioritized dollars for public safety and some of the other issues in that regard.
Public health.
Public health, right. It was based on, I think we spend almost all of our money more so on reimbursement of expenditures directly tied to COVID.
Yes, it was on expenditures. It was all related to COVID. That was the requirement.
Well, actually, that's not totally true. One of the reasons why I'm asking this question is that, and I know a lot of my colleagues asked about the urgency, which I spoke about last week in our budget process, being bold and being creative with the dollars that we use. For example, Dayton, Ohio used CARES dollars to make investments to arts and cultural organizations, because under the CARES Act, which is based on the FEMA model, you could use CARES dollars for organizations that had a disaster impact, and that's how they were able to be creative with those dollars. So my concern, and I will echo all the comments made by my colleagues, the lack of bold vision and urgency in this budget process. My next question is in reference to...
Can I respond to that one, though?
I'm moving on to my next question because I only have a few moments. Who are we using in reference to consultants to help us with either the Investment in Infrastructure and Jobs Act or other type of federal funding process?
So we have a consulting firm called Tetra Tech that we use that helps us determine where we can get reimbursement and the best way to allocate the money among various streams.
And so that was the same group we used for the American Rescue Plan, and we're also using that same group for the bipartisan infrastructure law?
You asked about federal funding. For the infrastructure bill, we have money allocated throughout the departments, and one of the things we'll look at for that, including kind of staffing, is what kind of outside help we need.
So from my understanding in the budget briefing, dollars have been allocated for some matching perspectives, and we've had some placeholders in the budget, correct?
There are two different things. There's one in the operating budget. There is money to help us attract dollars and then to implement improvements in our process so that when we get funding, we will implement the projects effectively. And then in the capital budget, there is matching funding, assuming that the dollars we get from the IAJA will require a local match.
Okay.
And it's 20 million on the operating side, and I think it's 60 on the
60
capital.
On the capital side, right. So I guess my question, what's the process to bring in assistance to help us navigate the bipartisan infrastructure law?
I'm going to ask Mike Carroll to talk about that in a little more of the details than I would.
Yeah, so I would say that, we have within city government significant capacity, but we're also hiring folks to focus on this. And so whether we're talking about the program guidance or which projects we select or the emphasis on diversity and hiring and procuring, we feel like we need one team that's 100% focused on accomplishing those goals for the city. And so we're figuring out how to hire those folks. The funding for that is reflected in the operating dollars that Rob's talking about. At the same time, we are going to be partnering up with others in the region, like I said before. It's not so much a spending question. These are other folks who are interested in these questions as much as we are. But the work involved in convening these people, aligning our strategies, our priorities, that would be also a task that a smaller team would be focused on, drawing on commissioners and folks in operating units as they need to in order to address specific needs. So that's not a huge resource question, just understanding the bill, but it requires work, and so we do need people to dedicate some time to that. If you're interested in more on the capital matching, I can talk to that, but I didn't feel like that was the focus of your question.
So when you say that we have significant capacity, are you talking about reference to spending the dollars or capacity and understanding how we apply for various grants and other funding opportunities through the infrastructure law?
I would say we're very good at applying for grants. We don't need a lot of outside support for that. We just need to make sure that we have the people in-house to apply for more than we've been applying for before. The city of Philadelphia is very successful at attracting grant dollars when it comes to infrastructure. So we just need to scale up. And, we do want to coordinate that effort as much as possible so that we're not just addressing issues like the state of good repair, which is always important, but we're also trying to build opportunity for people. And that's a little bit of a wrinkle that we need to learn more from others how to do. And so there's going to be a lot more focus on that moving forward.
Yeah, and I agree that the city has significant expertise and has been successful in getting grants over the years. Not really questioning that expertise, but my concern is that, as I've heard from talking with other council members and aldermen from around the country, the infrastructure bill is very complex. There's multiple agencies that have dollars that you can apply for. And so I don't want us to just take the traditional route, well, this project is a Department of Transportation looking project, so we're just going to apply for a grant for DOT, when there could be other funding opportunities in other parts of the federal government to go after those dollars. And so I just want to make sure that we are taking that type of perspective with our dollars. And then ultimately, we need to make sure that we are being creative and flexible in how we use those dollars. Because my concern is, going back to my initial question regarding the CARES Act, we could have used that in a broader way and not just specifically on reimbursement of expenses that were incurred to COVID, as we've seen in Dayton, Ohio, and other cities around the country. Thank you, Council President.
If I could just add to that, just briefly, I think one of the important things whenever we're looking at this federal funding is the impact on the local government. So in the Dayton example that you mentioned, Councilman, their revenue loss as associated with the pandemic was about $10 million, yet they received $138 million in ARPA funds. So their allocation of ARPA funds was substantially more than what their revenue loss is, whereas in our case, the revenue loss was more than the federal funds that we received. So I think that's one of the challenges we have when trying to compare ourselves with other governments, is that we're not similarly situated from a revenue perspective to be apples-to-apples comparisons.
Well, just to correct the record, I was making reference to CARES dollars, not ARPA dollars. I know there was distinction between the amount of ARPA dollars we have and the deficit we have. I was talking specifically on the care side, which could not be used as broad as ARPA dollars, and how that other jurisdictions around the country, like Dayton, use their CARES dollars to help some of the organizations, like arts and cultural organizations, that were devastated by the impact of COVID-19, where we could have done something on the care side, and then we had to have a council intervention on how we use those dollars on the ARPA side through our budget process. Thank you, Council President.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilman O, and I apologize. It was my oversight, both to Councilman O and to Chris Goy. The information.
You're not perfect, Council President. Just close.
I get told that every day of the week, but the chair
All right.
recognizes Councilman O.
Yes, thank you very much, Council President. So, in terms of dealing with the pandemic, the downturn in the economy, and all that, when it comes to growing the pie or reducing the need, I see that there has been an increase in the budget for the Commerce Department. The Commerce Department's actual budget for 2019 was $7 million, well, $7.34 million. 2020, $10.2 million. Then it was cut to $3.34 million. The projected budget for this year is $14.26 million, but $10.9 million of it is for purchase of services. Could you explain what is the goal of this purchase of services?
I'm not sure that the specific figures you mentioned. The Commerce Department includes the movement of significant dollars through PIDC for our stimulus program, which funds things like the Taking Care of Business, corridor cleaning program, and other business attention and retention programs. So I'm not sure if that's the $10.3 million that you mentioned, or it's for another service. We can go through that when we get to the Commerce Department's budget meeting in a few weeks.
All right. I am aware of that, and I appreciate that. I'll go into detail with them. In terms of the challenges of not having enough money and resources, the question of doing the same thing again and again, funding the failure. In terms of funding the solution, typically, cities or entities turn to new technology. Is that something that we can find in the budget? Are there new solutions where we can be force multipliers with our personnel, having technology do the work for us in the evenings, at night, those type of things, high definition cameras, other types of technology to deal with gun violence, deal with illegal dumping, fires, all the types of emergencies that we have to deal with?
Thank you, Council Member. I'd look for the operating departments to talk about some of the ways that they're using technology, but it's an absolute need. To your point, we spend a lot of time on technological upgrades for even the back of the house things that the city government does. We did that through our payroll system. We're doing that now through our accounting system, which, believe it or not, is older than me and I think a couple members on council. That need is definitely there. When it comes to violence prevention, I think I'd ask the police department, maybe OIT and MDO, to talk about where they're making some of those investments.
Okay, I'll ask them when we get to that with their departments. I'm very cognizant of my time, but basically it's affirmative. That's what the goal of the administration is. We'll go into the weeds a little bit. I do have a couple of just pointy questions here. Council appropriated $500,000 for relocating the targets of deadly retaliation, something that's a little new to me when it comes to this level of street violence, where, for example, a mother is targeted for shootings as well as her minor children, simply because she is the mother of someone that these young people, most of them very young, cannot get to. So we appropriated this $500,000. and we have not yet been able to move a single person in accordance with why we appropriated. For example, a mother had been relocated in the typical fashion that the district attorney's office does, which is to prepare them a witness for court, maybe 2 weeks in a hotel. They testify, they go back home. This is not something that we can do because they get exposed every time they return home. And so we've searched out for a new process, but we're also looking for where the money is. So far, what I found is the answer that I received is $200,000 is available for the people we identified. But, you know, we appropriated $500,000. Where is the other $300,000?
Councilmember Tumar Alexander. Good afternoon. Now,
good afternoon.
All of the $500,000 that you all appropriated, as I understand, went to the managing director's office. I believe you and other council members have been having conversations with the Office of Violence Prevention, and I think you know that we've recently hired a new director for the newly created Office of Victim Services. My understanding is those conversations was moving forward, and then that was coming up with the strategy for how to utilize that money. When I say strategy, I only say that I only say that because there's more than just Office of Violence Prevention and MDO. That's a part of, I think, how you utilize that money. For instance, right now, when we get requests from council or requests from community groups or whatever for relocation, we typically work with our community crisis intervention partner, PAN, and the district attorney's office to address those needs. So, you know, those families will get satisfied. Those families will get addressed. Whereas though PAN, typically we use some of that community, the CCIP money for those services. At times we'll work with district attorney and with the housing authority as well. So for that $500,000, I think our vision wasn't just absorb that $500,000 to MDO. We sort of sit on that money and use it all ourselves. We know some of those partners need that money to continue doing those services over and above the 1 and 2s and 3s that we're asking for now. So I'm not extremely up to date on where that process stands. I will get up to date on that and be able to give you that report out. Erica Atwood, who's our senior director for violence prevention policies and strategies, is on the line. I'm not sure if she has any updates other than that.
Yeah, thank you. I'll just skip that in the interest of time, as that you'll fill us in on it. I just want to state, as I'm looking at Councilmember Curtis Jones and, of course, Councilmember Kenyatta Johnson, as well as the Controller Rebecca Reinhardt, we're all involved in this conversation, as well as the Sheriff Bilal. We identified a nonprofit that could immediately move the women that we're talking about, but we have to get them the money. That's where we're kind of trying to find exactly where is this money. So you're going to get that information to us. So I'll move to my final question. And that has to do with SEPTA. You know, typically we give SEPTA $65 or $70 million. I know we do that so they can get additional funds. However, they just got $100 million from the federal government. And this year, it seems we're going to give them $100 million. And my question is, one, why are we giving them so much more money? When SEPTA is so unsafe, so unclean, and is not doing their part to encourage ridership? I would like to ask the administration and my colleagues to consider withholding $10 million and reimbursing them after they increase the salary of police officers, which is the lowest in the region, so they can recruit the 100 officers that they're short and put them onto platforms and throughout the subway system, where they need to really guarantee the public that they are looking out for their safety and that they will deal with just the unsanitary conditions that so many people complain about.
Thank you, Council Member. I think Mike Carroll's going to jump in, but the amount that we allocate to SEPTA is formulaic, and it's based off of the amount that the state kicks in, and then we kick in money to meet that match. And the state did contribute more money to SEPTA this year, which is what has increased our match. But Mike, did you want to add to that? I'm sorry.
Yeah, so thank you for that, Jim. I mean, we are obligated to make those matches, through the state law. But I also say that, SEPTA, similar to the city, has just gone through a pretty rough time. I do want to encourage you that they're doing everything that they can to build their ridership. They're fully aware of the issues that are, presented to them with respect to their rider safety and the public impact in terms of cleanliness and other issues. And this administration has partnered very closely with SEPTA to try and take on appropriate roles to address that stuff. We are seeing some significant improvement. I want to call out the work that's taken place around Somerset Station, for example, which has been a huge success. And we look to replicate that type of thing throughout the network. But there's a lot of work to do. There's a lot of recovery that's still underway. So we're hopeful that this matching investment, the investment we get from the state, and the investment we're looking forward to getting from the federal government really does start to turn that story around. And we are seeing some positive numbers in terms of people coming back to SEPTA on the buses, on the subways, the L, and on the regional rail. And we just want to make sure we keep putting our shoulder into that till we get back to where we need to be.
Thank you. I'll respectfully disagree. Talking to people in Harrogate and Kensington, that the Somerset Station is not a success, that spending $8 million on personnel that cannot protect the public, that cannot arrest, that basically just call the police who aren't there, who are understaffed, 100 officers, is unsatisfactory. And it seems to be an intentional policy by SEPTA, which for whatever reason, they seem more interested in doing things that get them accolades than taking care of the safety of the ridership. And it is dangerous. That is what I get a lot of, and that is what I see as well. But I appreciate that. My time is up. Thank you very much, Council President.
Thank you, Councilman. I believe that concludes our first round. So we're going to take a recess until 1:40. We will come back for our second round and give the executive branch a chance to be prepared for some follow-up questions. So we'll be back at 1:40. Thank you.